Making odd noises because I still don't have my intro music set up, and I need to test the audio to make sure that the stream isn't gonna fuck us in the holes. Still don't have
All
my
right.
cool, so that's already working. Cool. So this is the latest Real Libertarians stream, 8.5 because it's the second thing in the Principles Roundtable thing. Um, just discussing libertarian principles and trying to bridge the gap between various types of libertarians and discuss, sort of like strategies and potential flaws. And I'm your resident anarchist asshole here to fuck with shit. And also, there should be multiple people joining us over the course of the stream, so expect people to pop in across the screen like a mutating virus of libertarian flesh. So, with that being said, um, the general topic of this stream is going to start with the question that was sort of finished out last stream, and we'll stay on this topic for a short bit, and then we'll move on to the next thing. This isn't precisely a debate. It's not like it would be conducive. I'm not one of those people who says that like everything that is a disagreement or a conversation where there might be one is a debate. I don't like that shit. Like, oh yeah, come debate me. Like, and it's Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder being cunts to like high schoolers. So like my general thing here is like what I want this to be is a discussion, and there's going to be disagreements because A, we're libertarians, and B, the general like discussion topic that we're starting with is probably going to boil down to semantics in the end. But like if it doesn't, and if we can really get down to principle, like I think it's an actually interesting topic. But either way, we will have many topics on this particular stream, and like this sort of principles roundtable will build the foundation for many future streams to come. So feel free to like, share, and subscribe to help spread the disease to other people who have not yet been infected. This is Archie, Dennis Reinhold as last time. John Cobb will be new, so we'll start with him, and Max Wellington III, who is also new to the channel. And then we'll get to Dennis, Archie, Rose, Hody, this asshole. So start with Max. Who are you? When did you become a libertarian? And are you also an alcoholic?
Well, I'm half Irish, so yes, but
I'm Scottish. We're also I'm Scottish and German. We're both genetically
mhm,
defective on the alcoholism scale.
yeah. I'm Max. Been a libertarian since, oh God, I want to say 2004.
Yeah.
I, that was like the first year I voted. I was able to vote. So there was a Mac program called, God, what was it? Not Game Revolution, but like it was like some sort of social network before social networks were game connecting.
Mm.
And some guy was like, "Hey, I bet you're a libertarian," and I'm like, "Really? Tell me more." And started going through stuff, and I was like, "Yeah, right, I am." I broadly libertarian. I don't really like calling myself libertarian in public spaces because I don't want to say I'm not. I'm not the racist kind. I'm not the bad kind. Don't worry, But yeah,
Yeah,
that's me.
I just say I'm anarchist, and if you don't like it, suck my cunt. Um, yeah, fucking
I'll have to start using that.
yeah, right. So and we met on Tumblr, Max, like
Yeah,
maybe a decade or
uh,
so ago.
yeah. That sounds about right.
Yeah, fucking time goes by. John, you are also new to the channel, so start saying words. You are?
I'm John, and I'm an alcohol. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong meaning. No. I I'm a nobody who got into politics by accident. I used to be kind of a Republican. Where I'm from, the Republican Party is politics. So if you win in the primary for the Republican Party, that is the general election. Like you run unopposed in November. That's just how it works. So essentially, local politics was multiple different factions of Republicans. So it was kind of fun. in that regard. So I would have called myself like a Liberty Republican early on. I think I kind of got into politics in like 07, 08. I was like really into Ron Paul, like that kind of stuff. And then as I started to get older and I started to travel and I started to see the rest of the country and see how different people live and everything else, my views started to kind of change. So I don't know if you ever really become libertarian. I think it's more of a mindset of like a framework of how you operate. And then it just takes time for people to find the label libertarian. And I guess that's the reason why I don't really like it. I'm just a nobody who says words on the internet sometimes. And I try to help people who I think deserve help. So in 2016, I helped a lot with the Gary Johnson campaign. I brought a lot of people into the liberty movement, some of which have now ran for office themselves. So I'm really a nobody, but I just like to inspire other people to be somebody. So if I can do that through here, that's what I'm here for.
Very cool. And to address the comment in chat, no, nobody here is trans to my knowledge, but I said suck my cunt because it's funny. I also call my mouth a fuckhole sometimes. This is a very obscene channel. If you want Barney and Friends, that is on PBS. Dennis, you go.
So I'll do a quick rundown as opposed to the long 30-minute diatribe last week.
You were fine.
Been basically libertarian my whole life. Didn't know what it was or what it meant until probably in the late 80s. I said, hey, I think people should be able to do what they want and the government should get out of their lives unless they're hurting anybody else. Somebody said, that sounds like you're a libertarian. So I went and looked it up and said, yep, that sounds about right. And been that way ever since. I've been writing about libertarianism and politics since the mid to late 80s. Used to write for a place called Watchblog, which was really cool because it would have on the front page, it had a Democrat section, a Republican section, and a other libertarian section all on the same page together. So we used to argue back and forth a lot. It was a really great way to see what the other people were thinking. Unfortunately, the owner decided he wanted out of politics and the site just went away. So that was unfortunate. But other than that, that's what I've been doing. I engaged in and been a member of the Libertarian Party since the early 90s and do some podcasting here and there with We're Libertarians. And that's the short of it. There's a lot more I could go to, but I will not do that for brevity's sake. Imagine a libertarian being brief on something. A whole new thing.
All right, and Archie.
No, I'm not alcoholic. I deny that rumor. So anyone that wants the full version can look at last week's episode. But basically, I'm a minarchist and diehard supporter of the non-aggression principle, from which all of my politics flows, but not all of my life.
All right. Rose?
Yeah, so I'm Rose. By now you all know me.
Yes.
I'm the only real libertarian on this show right now. I've been one for as long as I can remember. I am both a small L libertarian and, as of the last few years, big L libertarian, as in I'm part of the New York Libertarian Party State Committee, also a member of the National Platform Committee. So, yeah, that's about it.
And Hody.
And I'm Hody Johns. I'm with the Love First Christians. We are a growing, especially this last week, we are very much a growing Christian community focused on nonviolence. We don't preach politics. Some people, I actually don't know their political persuasions, but we personally decide to act outside of politics to accomplish what we see as the greatness in the world, loving our neighbors as ourselves.
And I'm Jeremiah. I am high on Chaos Emeralds, and I consistently cause problems for people who I think deserve it. That's my general shtick. So with that being said, let's start with the last question that was discussed on the stream. And we'll get the two new people's perspective before we jump into this. What is the nature of government in your opinions, Max, and then we'll go John?
Nature of government, as broad and as simple as not simple, but as even-handed as I could go, I'd say nature of government is the supposedly agreed upon monopoly of violence against other monopoly of violence. Yeah, that's my basic understanding of the justification being sometimes we need someone to force people to do other things, and that's the role of government.
And you, John?
I think that the government is software as a service that you are automatically signed up for at birth, that is meant to offload some of the tasks that would otherwise be cumbersome or annoying to handle for yourself. Therefore, it should be as minimally invasive as possible and only be things that we can all mutually agree help us offload those things onto a mutual system. So a very minimal case for defense can be made because collectively it's a lot easier to defend against an army if you have a bunch of people that agree to do that together instead of one individual in his backyard, even though I think that it is your responsibility to still do that. But I think that it is literally software as a service that you should be, everybody should have to agree on what features are included in said software as a service, and we should only have to pay a minimal amount to cover said software as a service, and nobody should be profiting from that.
All right, and then we'll move into, let's go Hody, Dennis, Archie, Rose, and then I'll open my fuckhole about it.
Yeah, government is, I hate to just be definitional about it, but just, the system of coercion by which we regulate behaviors. That may sound, obviously I have a negative view about it. I am an anarchist personally. However, I do believe in things like self-government. So, for example, I won't allow myself to eat this candy until I finish my homework and things like that. So you'll find that I really don't care to get divided about definitions so long as we're united in concept. What some people might call government, I would not. I actually got into the liberty movement by being like, well, I'm a minarchist, obviously. And then I gave my definitions because I, reject hierarchies and whatnot. But people are like, oh, no, you're an anarchist. And I think my reading and history had led me astray because I would not be on the same page as the original anarchists. If I do get technical, I am against all hierarchies because I don't believe in an arc. When I say anarch, I believe in no ruler over you, whereas a hierarch means that because I'm smarter than you, I get to rule you. However, one of the reasons this got kind of messed up early on is because most people that use the term hierarchy, from the get-go, would just be like, you're smarter and I'm dumber. That's a hierarchy. And I think just because people are different doesn't necessarily mean one gets to rule over the other one. So I kind of exist in this state in between those philosophies where I say, people are going to be different. Some people are going to be better at worse than other things. Some people are going to want to work hard and make a lot. Some people are going to work less and make a little. I believe in the dignity of both human beings. I believe in the right of both to choose their own lives. And I believe that neither one should rule over the other. And I think that we need to get to a society that has embraced love and compassion for people who choose to live beneath their means and whatever that may be. So that's basically it for me.
Dennis.
So distilling it down to such a level is going to be interesting. But basically, my philosophy is that, as I said before, people should be free to live their lives as they choose, as long as they're not harming anybody else. And I think that's the only role that government plays in a society is to prevent each other from harming other people. agreed upon rules, how those agreed upon and how they're enforced and etc. is all based on the type of government you want to have in place. I don't believe that not having rules at all is anything that will function or exist in a society. And that's why I don't like the term anarchist, because it kind of derives from that area. I know that there's a new definition of, just no rulers as opposed to no rules, but that kind of leaves out the how are those rules decided upon, how are those rules enforced. That's where you get into the nitty gritty, and I think that's where a lot of the arguments and discussions between minarchism and anarchism fall into play, which is why, as a joke years ago, I started the anarchist-minarchist caucus. Because I really think that we're all arguing pretty much the same thing. It's just we're trying to pick sides and fight with each other on it for some reason. But I think definitions kind of are important on what a government is, because when we say government, there's a lot of people who have a lot of different ideas of what that means. And I think you can distill it down to a very base function of just three people in an area, two people deciding what the third person can and can't do to them is a base of government. People will call that a mutual defense agreement, but I think a mutual defense agreement is a form of government. So it's really dependent upon where you want to start at in those definitions and then go from there.
Archie.
That makes sense.
Okay, so before I get to my definition, I just have to point out and laugh at the fact that the gentleman who defined government as software as a service now has a Microsoft UID as his screen name due to some bug in Skype, and that's just hilarious. Also, I've literally done combat with Internet Explorer, so anyhow.
Well, to be clear, I think maybe he put that intentionally there because he's advertising his Twitter. That's his Twitter handle. So.
Okay, well, that still is funny.
Anyway, go for it.
It could have been a Skype bug and very believable.
It would be.
But anyhow, government to me is very simply the institutional use of force. And the unfortunate truth of human nature is that this attracts people that would rather use force instead of cooperation to achieve their ends. And that's why governments tend to, all institutions really do, but government does it more. They tend to try to grow their power and scope and their leverage. You have to watch them carefully, just like a fire.
And Rose.
Okay, so I feel like there's an important distinction here that needs to be made, and that's, state versus government. So the state is the entity that holds the monopoly on the initiation of force over a given geographic location. Okay, that's basically what it boils down to, is the gang that won. It is a parasitic entity that exists to extract value from the productive people, generally in the form of taxation or basically, you have to pay your dues. They've decided, they've arbitrarily decided we own this, land that you're living and producing value on. You have to pay us a percentage or else we'll, exact extreme violence against you. Government, on the other hand, is just, and then it's just a means of collective decision making. Like on a small scale, a government can be, a homeowners association saying, here's what we allow in our community, here's what we don't. It can be, a workers council. It can be just about anything, like whatever, the members of the community decide on, what their means of making rules should be, or what, how they should allocate resources. It could be democratic. It could be, a council of experts that people have decided should be in charge of things. So, yeah, I feel like that needed to be stated, that there is a difference between state and government. Like, state is the entity that holds the monopoly on violence. Government does, with a government without a state does not hold, it does not necessarily have the ability to initiate violence against the people.
All right, so I guess I'll jump in. And I'll say that, like, generally speaking, I think that when people talk about the state and, like, government, especially qua the term libertarian, they're probably saying the same thing because they conflate it in their mind. And, like, the governance board of, like, a company or something, or a church or whatever, like, that's gonna obviously be different than cops. But, like, at the same time, like, for me, I don't even like the term, like, govern, because what it comes to down to is to steer, to be at the helm of. It implies that there's a rudder and that you're at the control of that rudder. And that in doing so, you get to steer that ship. Like the governor on, it comes from the governor on a ship, and it would be the thing that you would use to steer the ship with everybody on it. Now, based on that, and based on the also similar sort of archonic nature of the anarchist, like, word, those two combined, understanding those from a sort of etymological level, ends me up at the conclusion that the state and government in the context of libertarianism and anarchy is the enemy. Even from a minarchist perspective, the reason you want it small is because you know how that can get when it gets bigger. And so, if ultimately the conclusion that we're drawing, like some of us, is, and I'm like trying to steel man also the position here, like if the conclusion that we're starting with is that, like, the government itself is, like, two people deciding what a third can't do to them. First off, there's a certain distinction to be drawn between negative and positive liberties, I think, that I think is a good sort of linchpin for the rest of these discussions going forward. I think that, like, saying what I can do, what I should have the liberty to do, is a lot different than saying what you shouldn't be able to do to me. I think all I need is one person to say what somebody can't do to me, and that should be me. That should be the ultimate thing. So I don't even think I need a consensus. And if people get together as groups of self-interested actors, all saying that same basic thing, to me, that's all going to end up in the same conclusions. It's all going to end up with people understanding that negative liberty is what's being preserved by the statements of "you can't do that to me." Now, the question is how this sort of affects society as a whole, and where the line stops for doing things to me, where the actual, like, violations might start and end, and how we resolve that going forward. I personally don't conflate a group of potentially self-interested or communitarian actors saying that you can't do that to me, or in this case, you can't do that to us, as a collection of me's, is government, as it were, or the state, as it would be. And so for me, like, as those levels, based on the etymology and based on the brass tacks when it comes down to it, qua, like, negative/positive liberty, I would say that from my particular bent, I would say that it's not the same thing. Also, we have a candidate for Senate in the chat. Jeremy Kaufman is here to say, I heard this dude was too much of a bitch for the emo caucus. You might not be in control, but that's because you're a spineless little bitch who's too autistic to recognize reality and try and manufacture a vocabulary to cover your idiocy. That's a whole lot of words for I'm stalking your channel because you made my friends sad about saying words about them on Twitter. The fun thing about that, let me just take a quick sidebar for 30 seconds and say, I said that somebody in a group chat said that I was unlikable and referenced several people who disagreed with that. And the emo caucus chose to get very salty sour about the fact that I completely anonymously referenced something that happened to me, and they chose to expel me over it because they're the real spineless little bitches. And expressing emotions that make me too emotional for the emo caucus, that just shows what posers they are. So I'm gonna stay with my victory in that regard.
Isn't this the
I was
person that
gonna
was
say the
expelled from
emo-
the Free
They
State
got
Project?
emo.
Yeah, that's the same Jeremy Kaufman. He has decided to grace us with his presence, and by grace I mean the least graceful person in the liberty movement, arguably. So with
Where is
That's a
he?
low bar.
He's
I
in-
don't see him in the chat.
check live chat. It's probably just not in top chat
He-
because he's using
He's
coarse
probably
language.
blocked.
No, he's not blocked.
No,
Thanks
no,
for the
Archie's
watch
probably blocked.
time.
Oh,
Closer
maybe,
to
yeah.
monetization.
Yeah, right? So, but either way, so with that in mind, with those definitions out of the way, like, let's get to responses to that and to other people's things. Like, this is sort of free-form discussion, so people can just jump on. I just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to voice their definition before the sort of free flow started.
I felt the need to make the distinction because so many people think, they think anarchy means chaos but okay, no, in order for any society of humans to function, there has to be some kind of governing apparatus. What we do not need is a state with the monopoly on violence. So I feel like there's an important distinction there. And yeah, people do tend to use state and government interchangeably, but they're not the same thing.
Right, yeah.
That's why I call it minarchy.
All right.
Well, yeah, you call it just the tip.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
And only for a minute.
yeah. So, well, and for Mormon, we can call it soaking. John Cobb, you can say words. I'm assuming you have words to say.
Yeah, I think that it's the issue with differentiating between state and government is that we've gotten to a point in human evolution to where whether we like it or not, we will be on a global scale. And there will be people who do bad things, whether we like it or not. So at some point, I do think we have evolved to the point where minarchy is kind of the idea. But I do think that there was this first kind of a liberal idea that we called the Constitution, and it was the first real attempt at having a framework for having only the positive rights. So saying like, hey, these are the or negative rights. These are the things that we're only going to allow the government to do, and then that's it. And then I think it was corrupted very early on by Hamilton with the idea of implied powers and the fact that you can just make a decision without having everybody talk about it. I think that's really where we went off the rails. If we went back to a situation of very, very, very loose guidelines where it's essentially like, hey, the only thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out a way to tax whether that, I don't know how we do that fairly, but you figure out a way to collectively defend yourselves and that kind of stuff. But it is very, very minimal. You should be allowed to live your own life and do whatever you want. And honestly, going back to the idea of the HOA, honestly, the smaller the government, the worse it is in my experience. Some of the worst experiences I've had with local governments is with HOAs. It's you inevitably end up with a small group of people in the neighborhood who think they have power over other people, and they start enacting it. It's kind of just human nature, and you can see it at the smallest levels, the middle levels, everywhere. So it's important for us to have laid out a groundwork of like, hey, this is just what we're not going to allow. And then everybody in your own little area, if you want to make it stricter, you can. But you're also allowed to leave that area and go to somewhere else that more agrees with what you agree with. So I think the 10th Amendment was very important, and I think that the Constitution was very important. However, I don't believe that our experiment was ever able to actually be carried out because I think it was corrupted literally from the beginning by Hamilton. So I agree. I think I am a minarchist. I would call myself a constitutionalist, but not in the way that it's bastardized now, just like I wouldn't call myself a liberal the way it's bastardized now, even though I do feel like I believe in liberal thought. So that's where I would go with it.
Yeah, I would call you more of a Madisonian as opposed to a Hamiltonian, right? Because Madison and Jefferson were very much on that same level where, I mean, it was Jefferson's first inaugural address where he stated, people should be free to live their lives as they choose, as long as they're not harming anybody else. In paraphrasing, but that's almost word for word what he said. And that was the Madisonian idea because Jefferson was a little bit more radical about it, and Madison had to kind of rein him in a little bit to get him to be acceptable to be elected. But that's kind of where that comes from, is from Madison mostly. But yeah, that was really the basics idea I understood as the our federal government and the Constitution would be, here are the basic rights that everybody has. And I think the Ninth Amendment is as much, if not more important than the 10th, to say, hey, these are some of the rights we've listed. These aren't all of them. These are the exhaustive list of them. This is, we're basically defining through Locke the idea of negative rights as opposed to positive rights. And that's where I think we get in a lot of problems, is we went away from that Enlightenment idea of what Madison and Jefferson were saying to try to fix society and fix the ills of society by using the government to make people be better, as opposed to just preaching to people to be better, or teaching people to be better, or encouraging people to be better to each other.
So I'll go.
And then you
go. Sorry.
No, I'm just saying with one more thing. With Americans, unfortunately, we're a little bit of a different breed than other people in that if you tell us we can't do something, that's the first thing we're going to want to do, right? That's just our contrary nature here in this country. So that's the worst thing to try to do, is try to tell people what they, you can't do this, can't do that. The more you start doing that and telling people what they have to do or what they can't do, the more they're going to rebel against it and not even understand the reasons why they're doing so.
So just real quick, just to finish to piggyback on that, I guess to go back to the wolf and sheep analogy, instead of looking at it as two wolves and a sheep deciding what we're going to do, who's going to be for dinner, it's more of a question of everyone deciding, hey, 99 out of 100 of us, there's that one weirdo, but 99 out of 100 of us agree that murder is wrong. 99 out of 100 of us agree that forced sexual encounters are wrong. So there's very few things that are almost universal truths that you can vote and say, these are just things that we don't want to happen to us. It's not things that we're telling you can't do. It's things we're saying we don't want it to happen to us. And then we're just laying down that groundwork and then letting everybody go and dress and do whatever they want to do. Is that kind of where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is too, is if we had 100% agreement on those things, like you shouldn't be able to kill someone, you shouldn't be able to murder them, rape them, steal from them. If we all 100% agreed upon that, we wouldn't need the laws to begin with. But the fact is we do, because we got people out there who are sociopaths, psychopaths, don't care, lacking, there's all these reasons why they do these things and don't agree with those rules. So I think having a basic set of negative rights protected is a smart thing to do. The problem is when you get into, if we're doing this, then we need to start doing more stuff, and then that's when the arguments and the problems come into play.
So a few responses real quick, but I'll make it very short. First off, Kant brings up a good point in chat. Kant Lonathu says, if we're framing it within U.S. history, I think technically the Articles of Confederation would be the first guidelines. And then, for me, what I'll say in response to, what's been said in general is, so the first thing is, I don't think going back to the start would be the solution, because, A, women, not landowners, black people, Jews, Irish, natives, Japanese, Chinese, I could keep listing. We're all treated like absolute dog shit. And the government thrived based on its ability to treat people like absolute dog shit. And it was to the point of this being systemic that, Thomas Paine, the guy who wrote a significant amount of pro-U.S. propaganda in order to maintain the fervor for the revolution, that guy was basically told to fuck off. Because the U.S. government was like, we can't have you saying slavery is bad. We can't have you calling for. We can't have you supporting actual radical ideals. We've got to tell you to fuck off. So off he fucked to go help the French with their revolution. And part of the reason he did that was because the French were such a key part of the American Revolution that the U.S. was never truly independent to begin with. That's the reason the Whiskey Rebellion happened, is because you had to, George bitch-ass Washington had to come up and crush, a local tax rebellion by, bringing 13,000 troops to bear. Because that's how that works. So for my money, I don't think that goes far enough, and I'm very much in the sort of Spooner tradition of saying, fuck the Constitution, it's not good enough, or it made things this way. Rose?
I think I agree with you. I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
everything that you said against that was all compromises that were put in place to garner enough support to make it good. I think at this point we would have enough support to write a new constitution that is no compromises, is the literal framework just to protect negative rights. And I think we would be able to do that versus in the past, everybody just gave in and made compromises and gave concessions for other people. I think the idea and the ideals behind the original Constitution, without compromises, like on slavery, like you said, the compromise, it's literally a compromise, but it's like you had multiple people saying, hey, this is not okay, nobody should be owned. And then you have them going, well, yeah, but if you say that, then we can't do this thing. So it's back to that. It's like no compromises. Everybody is an individual. Like, I think we would have support to do that if we could get enough people behind it.
So, in other words, it'll work this time. This time it will not. This time loopholes will not be found. Like I was going to say, humans are naturally cooperative. The vast majority of humans are not sociopaths. However, when you deliberately create an entity that is given a monopoly over the initiation of force, the few sociopaths that do exist will gravitate towards those positions of power. And in addition, when you grant this entity, the control over the very things that it needs to grow and expand its power, such as, policing, national defense, that's all it needs to seize more power. That's why it will continue to grow in size and scope until eventually we're right back where we started. That is why you don't deliberately institutionalize violence.
And
I just say that if you
go for it.
I was going to say, when you talk about human nature and humans being cooperative to a point, but they also, human nature is they want order and rules too.
Well, yes,
they want to understand what those rules are.
Right. They are naturally cooperative. They are also naturally competitive. Like you'll have different people you'll have people forming communities where they're cooperative with one another, and then you'll have competition between communities. So, I'm of the belief that there will always be, for as long as resource scarcity exists, there's always going to be markets. Like there will be cooperation amongst local communities, and then there will be markets, and that's how they'll handle distribution of scarce resources. So, yeah, of course, there's going to be competition.
One thing,
I'm
just
talking about competition. I'm talking about people wanting rules.
Just to respond to chat, we've got two things from Kant. The issue is that a constitution can easily become antiquated, and it, just like religious texts, can be made to argue for tyrannical ends. When we try to stick to a constitution, we restrict ourselves from being innovative, from growing in our understanding of ethics and social organization and collaboration. And also, we can talk about that serious bit, but we can also talk about Kaufman saying it's more like a panel of incels and one mid-chick deciding who's going to stay a virgin because the dudes on this panel have the collective hygiene of a homeless shelter. First off, excellent political discourse. The second thing is, if we want to talk about weird sexual blunting, maybe you could avoid telling minors to suck your dick, but we can talk about you on a different stream, you self-obsessed weird. Anyway, so
he is a little bit.
Most of the Mises talk it wanted him because he was such an embarrassment. So why are you giving him attention?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think
for fuck's sake, I'm putting the new this caucus, and they were pissed about how bad he was making them look. So
yeah,
I would just ignore this fucktard.
I'm going to.
I
for
fully
the most
support
part.
him. I fully support him calling you out and sharing the stream and getting as many of his people to come over and watch it as possible.
Yeah, ideally.
Yeah.
YouTube loves us to have at least 500 hours, right? Or is it 5,000 hours now? Yeah. So, I mean, as many eyeballs as we can get over here, that'd be great.
Yeah. And that's the other half of it is you're in this chat, man. You could be doing anything with your Sunday evening. You're in this chat. So, thank you for your patronage. Anyway, so I think that is yeah. Well, I irritate all the right people or the wrong ones, depending on your perspective. So, generally speaking, I think that's a good point to bring up, is that it sort of makes it inflexible, is having a founding document instead of founding principles, and like a document that states those principles. I think that if we want to start from a position of saying, for instance, that the Constitution is where we should start, which version of the Constitution? Like before the Bill of Rights? Like the Federalist version, of the Anti-Federalist version, the version downstream where like a significant amount of slavery became illegal. Like, I'm trying to figure out specifically what the actual tolerances are here for the constitutionalists in this particular panel to, you know, co-sign the Constitution. Because for me, fuck the Constitution, it's magic paper that didn't do shit. And then, like, you know, co-signed a whole lot of statist garbage. But, like, you know, if we are going to say that it's better than that, then we should be, like, very specific about which form and how we go about making sure that happens.
I'm not sure it's possible, to be honest.
Yeah, same. And anybody can go.
Well, there's no way it's
Okay.
ever going to be perfect. Anybody, I mean, any government's ever going to be perfect. Even anarchy is not going to be perfect, right? So, I mean, the one good thing about the Constitution, there's actually good things about the Constitution, as opposed to, at least over the Articles of Federation, which I think was a completely flawed document, is that there was no means. The first thing was there was no means for actual mutual defense in the Articles of Confederation that could actually work. So we were just leaving ourselves out to be taken over by the first power who wanted our resources and was just going to come in and take it. But the second thing with the Constitution is that the Constitution isn't a static document. It can be changed. It can be modified, but there are requirements to do so. The requirements to do so is complete buy-in for everybody in the country, not just a simple majority. You have to have 3/4, in the states, and you have to have all, there's such a high bar in order to change the Constitution, kind of like in the Libertarian Party, we have such a high bar to change the platform, so that kind of like in the Libertarian Party, we can all, when you have a large agreement on something, that's when you can get it changed. The problem we have nowadays is that too many people are trying to do against what Madison said in his Madisonian beliefs, in that we're trying to reimagine interpreting the Constitution in today's language as opposed to into what was meant in the originalism of when it was created, when it was done. And that's when we're getting into a lot of really weird things. I mean, that's how we got Brown versus fortification. That's how we got all kinds of stuff in the 20th century that just goes against and flies in the face of what the original intent of the document was supposed to be when it was written. So if you want to change a document, that's fine. Feel free. You need to, because you need to over time, but you do it the right way. Do it with buy-in. Do it through the amendment process. Do not do it by just having judicial people getting in place and just deciding that they like it a different way, so we're going to go it that way. That's when you get into the real, I think, nine people deciding the fate of, what we live under, as opposed to having buy-in by the majority of the country on what we're going to be doing.
And Scourge
Just
in
to go
chat
back to my
says we've got a
software-
Lysander Spooner on our hands. So yes, absolutely, Lysander Spooner rules. Except he doesn't. John Cobb.
To go back to my analogy earlier, I really do believe that government should be like software as a service, and I do not see the Constitution as like a hard and fast document. That is one thing, and it has to stay that way. I think we should look at it as a guideline for what we go for, because I do think that a lot of the math in it makes sense as far as how we update it and how. And sites that are enumerated, like most of them. There's a few in there from the original that were compromises that obviously shouldn't be in there. And then obvious changes later, like why is it that it's only landowners that have a right to participate and things like that. If you can make a valid argument for that, then I'm fine with it. But I would see it more like a README file. This is, even if you look at like open source projects, like I'm a for fun developer on the side. So whenever you look at how open source projects run, we all have a README file, though, that is still like a central document that is like, hey, just so that we're all on the same page, this is what we're looking at as what this is now. So to not have something like that to look to and say, hey, this is the guidelines, this is the rule book, but then have a way for the community to change it, to update it as the technology changes. Look at C++. I mean, if you look at C++ from its beginning to where it is now, it's totally different. I left C++ for like 10 years and came back, and I had to completely relearn the language almost. It's a document that will always, it's a technology that will always be updating and always changing, but it's also things that the community agrees are better for the project or make it more efficient or fix code issues or clarify situations and where the questions aren't as clear. So I would see it like that. I think it more is a software as a service, like a README. However, I agree with you, Jeremiah. The piece of paper is a piece of paper that means nothing if we don't all agree to it. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot more of now is more and more and more people saying, I don't like where this is going anymore, so I'm not going to participate in this anymore, which then also breeds other issues. So whenever it becomes too constrictive to where there is a larger group of people who are not interested in participating in it, then there is a group of people who are interested in participating in it. That piece of paper becomes a bogus piece of paper that means nothing. So at this point, I do think the Constitution as it is a bogus piece of paper that means nothing, because I think the states and everybody else do whatever they want to do. And then the courts will interpret it however they're asked to interpret it by whoever's in control at the time. So it is a bogus piece of paper. It has become a bogus piece of paper because we've allowed it to become a bogus piece of paper.
I'd like to add something there.
Go.
So yeah, I will often liken the Constitution to a restraining order. And as we all know, a restraining order is just a piece of paper, and it's not going to keep the asshole away that wants to abuse someone. A gun will do that. I would take the current Constitution, all the current amendments, but I would add 3 of them. The first is what I call the FIJA Amendment, Fully Informed Jury Association. It would require every judge at every level before every trial to instruct the jury that they have the power and the authority and the right to nullify if they disagree with the law itself. The second amendment that I would propose would be a politician swears an oath to uphold the Constitution, but then they laugh at that oath and they go on and propose legislation that's going to do whatever. I consider that perjury to their oath. Every state has laws against perjury. This amendment would ensure that a politician could be held accountable via perjury to their oath of office.
That'd be cool.
So saying like, oh, let's, restrict, magazine sizes. Oh, guess what? That's 15 years in prison, you SOB. They're not going to do that if they think they're going to face actual prison time.
You would think.
But
just to throw in there real quick, and I'll let you go back. I just watched a video of our house waving a foreign flag while they stole our money.
Yeah.
That is literal treason. So to say that adding another law that would make it illegal for them to commit treason is just not going to work. At this point, there is no oversight of them, so it means nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll address that after I do my...
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So the third amendment I would propose is right now, who impeaches Congress? Who impeaches the president? Federal officials are the only people that can do that. That the states have the authority to impeachment, that have the full authority to remove a president, a vice president, etc., on down the line, so that the only people that can remove federal officials are no longer just federal officials. Yeah. So to your point, John, right now we have so many, look at Mos Eisley Spaceport, a more wretched hive of scum and villainy I've never seen. Kenobi says. Well, DC puts that to shame. What I'm saying is, with these amendments, it wouldn't get this bad because we could root out the bad ones way faster.
So, Rose, did you want to reply?
Oh, no, I was just to respond to the nullification thing. Like, we already theoretically have the right to nullify unjust laws. Like, jury nullification was supposed to be a check on, unjust laws. But how often does jury nullification actually happen? Practically never, because
Nobody knows about it.
Nobody knows about it. And if you give any, hint that you might know that it exists, you're dismissed. You'll never make it onto a jury. And if you do manage to lie your way onto a jury, you'll be removed pretty fast once it becomes clear that you're just going to nullify. So,
right.
Another
Hence
thing,
the amendment. The judge is forced to do it.
Like, we were talking about how, it's a restraining order. Yeah, exactly. Like, you get pulled over when, driving. You tell the cop, okay, I do not consent to an unwarranted search. Theoretically, as far as the Constitution is concerned, they're supposed to say, oh, darn, guess I can't search this guy. Better go find somebody else to bother. Okay, what happens in real life? Okay, no, they shatter the window. They drag you out of the car. They beat the shit out of you. Then they plant drugs on you, claim you were resisting arrest, and then you, spend 2 days in jail before you can even go before a judge.
That's really mean. Sometimes they plant a gun.
Okay, yeah. Whether they plant a drug
with the wrong magazine, and then they'll put it in the picture.
So, and then anyway, ultimately you probably end up taking a plea deal because you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to retain a lawyer who doesn't, own stock in private prison corporations and isn't being paid by the very system that they, that they're supposed to be defending you against.
Yeah.
And, you ultimately take some bullshit plea deal because you can't afford to take it to trial.
The Innocence Project covers that shit all the fucking time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. I talked to David Fite not too long ago, and he says that you are the power works with a whole lot of organizations, right? I would love to see them work with Innocence. That would make me support that effort even more, because I support them already. But
yeah, I'm just saying, the idea of there being a check on power already exists, and yeah, look how far it's gotten us.
Andrew Harrison, I don't think we've met. Potentially we have, but hello.
I invite. Yeah.
Hi.
The guy who used to be active on our Discord server.
Yeah, I sure did. We might have. You might know me as Scott Forbes, but don't talk to me, bro.
Yeah. So feel free to introduce yourself and let people know who you are, when you became a libertarian, etc. Circumstances.
Oh boy, I'm just here to set this up. I'm about to give my kid or put my kid to bed. I don't have time for a full introduction, but I guess I'm still technically a libertarian. I'd call myself more an anarchist now.
Yeah, anarchists are just pure libertarians.
I mean, I'm way left though, so I think generally, I presume from your accent, you're American. So
I'm American, but I like the left.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, I became a libertarian in high school though, which was a million years ago because I thought I was a Republican. And somebody in my Model UN class was like, you should check out this website. And it was libertarianism.org. And here I am today, some 25 years later, still never winning any political battles whatsoever. Just from the other side now.
Yeah. All right, cool. So what is your take here? We're basically talking about the nature and extent of government, what the ideal government would be. You're on Team Zero, so that's good. We're getting some balance in here.
The ideal level of government would be none, essentially. I mean, if you're talking about the state.
Yeah.
I think in terms of community government, the ideal amount of government would vary from community to community. And when I say community government, I mean like socially enforced standards of behavior. Maybe sometimes enforced with reactive violence, but certainly nothing like the state, though. Yeah, I just can't think of any justification for it.
Yeah,
honestly.
Hashtag Nazi punks fuck off. Hashtags pedo get chipped.
Did Kaufman? I was going to say I liked his "War is Retarded" video, but whatever. He decided to come in here and be an asshole for no fucking reason.
Yeah, well, and it's not
It's
for
funny. Funny. He doesn't. I am Mises Caucus. You know. We probably agreed on some things, but like I said, he was such an embarrassment. Most of the Mises Caucus couldn't even stand him.
Well, and that's
that's a hell of a low bar.
And that's the thing, like,
Sorry.
people don't like what it's. I mean, I'm a fucking asshole about a lot of shit, Archie. I've already talked shit about the Mises Caucus on a ton of streams. You're not gonna outdo me in that regard. But like the general thing that I think about that's funny is that he thought it was a good use of his time to say that, and he thought that my people gave a fuck what he thinks. They do not. We're here for a fucking civil conversation about actual principles, not here to hear you talking about how black people should be repatriated. You can go be a fucking scumbag somewhere where people care. Where everybody knows your name.
I was willing to give him credit because he does a lot of, charity work and IRL work. But yeah, saying outrageous things on the internet was kind of his brand, but he did so much. He did so much damage to, our cause that it wasn't worth it.
Well, in general, then because I know Andrew has probably got a book relatively soon, so. Because I think you got your, so you can give like a short spiel and we'll sort of reply to that regarding libertarianism, like anarchy qua minarchy, like which one, and then like next time we can specifically send you a link like on the time and plan this ahead. We do this normally on Sunday at around like 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So you're free to come back as well when you do have more time, but you're free to give a spiel. Thanks. To sort of drop a bomb and like give us like some words to respond to when you do have to book.
Oh man, I gotta run right now and I'd rather prepare, but how long will you guys be going?
We'll probably be going for a significant amount of time more. If you're back, if you can be back within like 30-45 minutes, you'll probably have a significant amount of time to speak.
Oh, cool. I mean, I don't need it, but I'll happily take it when I come back. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Awesome.
Good to see you.
Good to meet you.
Likewise.
From the chat, though, from the we've got Scourge saying, first off, if your name is a reference to the Sonic character, that's very based. And then the second thing is, Scourge says, fist bump, I'm a Spooner fan too. Article 1, Section 8, the right to levy taxes. Where did this magic come from, right? He also said, because people were referencing C, include Bill of Rights.h. Phew, this version of country just got better. So I thought that was funny. And we'll address more comments going forward, but I thought it was funny that he referenced C. Anyway, so with that, let's just say the paper isn't what causes the actual enforcement then. We can all agree that without, like, backing, the paper is worthless. So wouldn't it just be, like, people doing shit that makes it matter and not the actual paper that they base the shit they do on?
Yeah, this is kind of where I come from at it, is politics is all downstream from culture, right? Jeremy's actually a great example of this. You have a toxic culture and people will be like, oh, we need a state to take care of like gross stuff like that, right? And so they'll prop up a state, and then the state obviously comes forward with its host of issues. And so this is why like culture matters so much. Libertarians pretty much universally agree on this point now that the Mises Caucus is kind of on board with that, with Angela saying it's all about the culture war. That's all we got to do. We just come in on different sides on what creates a good culture and bad culture, whether like having black people in the United States is a good thing or a bad thing, or, letting people identify the way they'd like to is okay. Like that's like, and there's some people who would say that it's toxic. And I come from kind of an idea where I say it's like, good. Now, here's the thing. We can have these debates. We iron out this issue here at the cultural level. And if we do, then there's no point in government because we're all culturally on the same page. I don't need a document to be like, if somebody's bad, like if somebody's breaking into your house, you can shoot them, because we all just recognize if somebody's breaking into my house, I can shoot them, right? Like the culture's fixed. If the culture's plagued, then they're not going to recognize that somebody who breaks into my house, I can shoot because I'm threatened. And so then, and this is kind of the defects that you see with the Constitution, is when we have a toxic culture, a cultural problem, the Constitution institutionalizes this problem. It ferments it. It creates laws around it. It creates systems around it. You know, you look at now what it would take, you know, when we talk about, well, we need to dismantle like the corporate welfare state. Well, that's all tangled up with personal welfare. And it's like, you're going to take the food out of these people's mouths to do this? Or, you know, you want criminal justice reform. That's great. You're looking at a series of 80 plus different laws, constitutional rulings. I mean, and that matters big time because it affects how we do things. You look at something like the example that I'll give is here in Utah. We voted to legalize marijuana, and the governor just was like, nah, and it's gone. Right?
Yeah,
like, can't. You know, so it was like, nope. And so we get these issues where we just say, well, now we've even got a situation where the majority wants to do the right thing. You look at things with like civil rights. The majority was pushing for this well before Congress was. They're dragging their heels. And the only reason Congress even ended up doing anything about it at all was to score political points. And you just get this, you know, and it took this institutionalizing of the wrong thing. Then we say, well, now the majority wants to do the right thing. Marijuana's still what it is at the federal level. There are a bunch of states that are like, we're not going to enforce that. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that because, you know, and again, this isn't because of the goodness of their hearts. This is because people want to score these political points. And so my issue is, it's just, I actually don't find it handy to even talk about the government very much as an entity, because if we fix the culture, you would just ignore the government when it's trying to do the wrong thing. You just like, fine, they'll shoot me, kill me for doing the wrong thing, whatever. I want to focus on doing the right thing. And when people recognize, hey, maybe we shouldn't be killing people that are like trying to feed the homeless or protesting wars and stuff like that, then maybe we can actually get some change going. And so I just find that, like, if the idea is, oh, if we all get together because we culturally believe in doing the right thing and we make the government do the right thing, what was the point of having the government at all? Because you just collectively as a culture said, and just, we're all just going to do the right.
Real quick, before you say something, Dennis, another example, Little Rock 9. Like, they were allowed to be in that school, but they had to be escorted in because a violent mob of white people didn't want them. It's like, shut the fuck up. The law said that. And so, like, even if the majority decides on something, even if their conscience is clear and focused, you cannot make the state unfuck itself. My opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Go, Dennis.
Just a quick kind of note on all this. So what you're saying basically is that we should be operating in a much similar way as cancel culture. I mean, isn't that basically cancel culture?
Yes.
I mean, you're not.
But
wrong.
it's not perfect either, because how many times has cancel culture has been mob rule, and the mob decides that somebody shouldn't be able to speak, and therefore their rights aren't being protected. So there's a line that there's a balance that has to be made in some way, shape, or form, where you have like agreed upon rules that we all kind of basically live by, which is where we get into the state and the government side of things, to where mobs and cancel culture can't take down somebody just for saying something that's outside of the norm or outside of what the majority wants, right? We have to protect minority rights in some way. I think that's the way you kind of have to do it. If you don't, you end up with the bad aspects of the cancel culture that we see as well as the good parts of cancel culture. And the same thing goes with government. You have the bad parts of government, but you have the good parts of government. You have to find a way to straddle that line and make things work. It's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be a fluctuating miasma of trying to make it work, right? And I agree that once culture comes along to the point where those things aren't necessary, where we can say for sure that 100% of the people are going to be okay with hiring a black person to work for their company, we wouldn't have to worry about utilizing that cancel culture to punish that person to not do that, or have a law in place to prevent that from happening. We would just have it be the way it is. But that's we're not there yet. We're not going to be there for a while. And the way society works, it's going to ebb and flow back and forth. So there's no, I don't think, any right answer either way. We have to kind of find a balance here and have to try to keep people focused on the idea of people should be free to live their lives as they choose, as long as they're not harming anybody else, apropos of whether or not it's government that's doing it and protecting it, or whether or not it's society doing it and protecting it. We have to come to that agreement first before any of this is going to work in the way we think it should.
And sorry, I didn't mean to overrun you, Max.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I also want to point out that cancel culture, quote, it is basically just, good and bad. Obviously, it's basically the same thing, except on a social level as BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanction movement from like apartheid South Africa, all that stuff. And yeah, sorry, I wanted to point that out. That,
like I said, there's a real bad aspect of it. It can go way too far, and but the problem is that is the basics of libertarian culture and how we think libertarianism and anarchy should run, is how cancel culture works.
right.
But we all seen over history how that can be abused as well, and how bad it can be if it's not checked. And I think that's where we have to come into play with how do we check that? Is that check going to be a written set of agreed upon protections, and who's protecting that, and how are we doing that? And that's where we get into the idea of whether or not state and not state, government and not a government. It's as long as we're addressing that, I don't care which way it is, as long as it's getting addressed somehow. And I think just the fact of addressing that and having a protected set of rights like that is essentially government. And then we can get into the argument whether or not it's a state or government or blah, blah, blah. That's where we get into that discussion. But I think a lot of people, especially in the libertarian side of things, don't understand that cancel culture that they complain about, the people at Reason, what's his name?
Gillespie?
Sob.
Soab, right? So Soab, whatever.
Oh, Robbie.
Huge in this thing. And it's like you're arguing against your basic idea of what libertarianism is. When you do this, you're really just making yourself look like a hypocrite. You don't understand it because they don't understand why it's that way, right? But they do have a point sometimes in arguing against the excesses of it. And that's, I think, where a lot of people fall into the hole.
I guess it depends on what you mean by cancel culture. Because, I mean, if you're just talking about things like boycotts, okay, yeah, that's very libertarian, okay. I don't agree with you, so I'm going to just not do business with you. However, oftentimes when people talk about cancel culture, they're talking about, like when it takes the form of, mobs who form for the express purpose of harassing you, like people who will gather outside your home or place of business and,
I'll put it this way.
I with these mobs, like they're you can't reason with them, and also or people who will like try to get you fired from your job and try to ruin your life. So,
but that's the libertarian idea, right? I mean, the idea is that we won't have a need for the Civil Rights Amendment.
Stuff is deliberately manufactured in order to create division, and
that's what I'm saying. There's a bad aspect to it, but you look at it as. We say that we don't need a Civil Rights Amendment because if somebody were to put up a business and say we're not going to hire or serve black people in this business, then we would all collectively not do business there, and that would put them out of business. They would either have to change their behavior or go out of business. That's the same thing as what we're saying here is when we see somebody online who's saying really inappropriate things, let's say a Jeremy Kauffman saying horrible, horrible stuff, and to the point where the Free State Project and the Mises Caucus all say, we're disassociating with you. We want to fire you from what you. And they fired him from the Free State Project. They kicked him out of the Mises Caucus, right? That's the same thing. That's freedom of association. That's how we envision handling a lot of these things where we don't need laws and government coming in and saying, you can do this and you can't do that. You can't do this. You can't, that's with the Civil Rights Amendment. So that's the basic idea of libertarianism. But the problem is, as you point out, that can be misused, that can be abused, that can be a horrible situation. And you get the same thing with government as well. When you have a small government, I grew up living in a small town, right, in the 60s and 70s, and you wouldn't believe the corruption and things goes on out there. But there's no way to protect against it if you don't have a overarching federal. You can do this, you can't do. these rights are protected, because you have nothing to fall back on at that point. There's nothing to protect you from that other than you just kind of have to move, basically. But when you've got that kind of situation in every single area, because there's basically warlords running the place, there's nothing, nobody coming in to kind of protect the people who live there from that. And that's why I think it's really dangerous to say one way or the other. Things we have to find a way to solve these issues, still have the freedoms, but also have the protections. How do we get there? How do we do that? Right now we have this system in place. It may not be perfect, but the other solutions that I've seen aren't perfect either. And it's really just kind of more focusing on, let's try to get people to be better.
Sorry. And just to be clear, nothing will ever be perfect. Utopia is a lie. And I think that one of the things that we have to really ascertain and understand as a baseline is that utopia is a lie that holds back every movement. It's malicious. The idea that there will ever be a utopia, a perfect world, means that if you want to have your solutions, Mr. Libertarian, Mr. Anarchist, you have to be solve all of the lifeboat scenarios, even lifeboat scenarios that the current fucking bullshit does not solve. Like Scourge in chat over here is saying, currently we have a joke of governance. You can lie, campaign on a lie, and then we don't immediately toss them from governments when we find out. And that's exactly what it is. It's just dishonesty, as Jason, who I also sent a link to, but maybe he's still recovering. By the way, wish you well. Might say accountability is what's important, and we don't have that because the fucking government is in our way. And so I think that's a valuable thing to remember. John, did you was it Archie? I'm actually not sure.
It was me. I was just going to say to what Hody said earlier is I agree. I don't know everybody's real name, so I'm having to go by this. So I hope I get everybody's names right. But I agree with you that, and I used to have kind of the same viewpoint of it's not as important to talk about it, because if we fix the culture, then we would all be intelligent enough to be able to see that this is wrong and do right. However, if I heard you correctly, you're from Utah, and that's in the top 20, it's the 24th state in the country in intelligence. And a lot of the people who I talk to are from Michigan and places like that are literally the top 3 is whenever you start getting into places where there is a significant portion of the population, over the majority, who I'm not I'll say the quiet part out loud. Just by being able to open this Skype chat and participate with an external microphone and things like that, you have outdone 40% of the population of America. Now, that may not be your local population, but that's just the truth of the matter. And what we end up seeing is in a lot of these places where we are more intelligent, we can do these things on our own, we don't have to look to something else. It seems kind of an absurd idea for us to even have to think about it, because to us it is absurd. It's just what you should do. But unfortunately, there's a significant portion of the population that I've rubbed against now who need that. They need to know, well, where do I pull that up? Well, who is it that I'm listening to? What is the current rules? What is the current rule book? You're talking about people who, act like government is the differences between NCAA and NFL football is this a spot foul or is it a straight yardage foul? What are we playing? What rule are we playing by right now? Unfortunately, there is a significant a portion of the bell curve that is underneath that 50%. And if you live in an area where that is the majority, like where I grew up, you start to realize that it is important for us to make the rule book and have somewhere for us to all agree on and for all of us to have an open conversation. I'm not saying that those people don't deserve to have part in the conversation or don't deserve to have a say in government, but I think that they are really what the Constitution is really protecting against two things if it was put in place the way it should have been. It would be protecting against someone being able to become tyrannical and exploit those people and become a higher class. But it should also protect the people from the bottom from doing things that are bad for the collective at the end without having some sort of filter of discussion and like idea. A lot of these people are not unwilling to have different ideas either. That's the other idea that I think people fall into, is that they're unwilling to compromise or talk to these people because they think they're dumb and that they have no capability of comprehending. What it really is that nobody wants to take the time, because it is tedious and it's hard sometimes to talk to someone who doesn't understand. And it can get frustrating, and then it ends up, they become the other, and they become less human or whatever. So I think it is important for us to talk about it for those people. Like, for the people who are not capable of doing that, I think it's important for us to at least discuss what is the framework that is common sense to us, that we feel like is just should be. What is that? And I'm not saying that I have the correct prescription. Like I said, I'm just a nobody on the internet, but I would like to participate in the conversation. So it's like, what is that? What is it that is common sense to us that this should be the way it is?
Yeah. Well, and just to be super clear, like, the general thing that I want to convey is, like, I think that there's a significant amount of discussion that needs to happen, but I think that discussion is stymied by the state. I don't think the state enables it. I don't think it ever did. I think that the state, what it does, and government, as a proxy term for the state, does, is it says, this is the way that we're going to do things. We have decided by, community consensus, fucking a vote, fucking, like, the board has decided, our Congress people have decided. And, like, when it comes down to it, the people's choice usually takes, like, not even a back seat. It's being keel-hauled behind the fucking trailer hitch. And because the state is directly and actively acting at the behest of those in actual power, and always has, because the original government was not independent, in fact, and owed foreign governments a fuck of money, and that's why they were France's bitch when it came to the Whiskey Rebellion. When it comes down to it, the state doesn't need to give a shit what we think. And I think that that's a mechanistic flaw with trying to have some sort of, like, consensus based on this shit. Like, Kant says in chat, the issue is the lack of accountability. One can have the best constitution or contract, but if there is no active accountability, it won't matter. And, like, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say, like, the government has always been beholden to separate entities. If the government was, like, somehow accountable to the people, that'd be one thing. That might, in fact, be pretty based. They have no reason to be. They never did. And one of the reasons that they don't is because the inherent nature of the state, let me unblur my camera here, the inherent nature of the state is a fucking monopoly on force. A monopoly on the legitimate use of force. And in being so, what we end up with when we like talk about, state versus no state, government versus no government, we talk about which group of people might get away with exploiting people. Will it be the state acting at the interests of, like, mega corporations, banks, international actors, old money, blood money, churches, whatever, cults, Freemasons, Illuminati, lizards? I don't care. Like, the general vibe I'm trying to convey, and no, I don't believe in lizards. I'm saying that as Kareem, you need to show up to these streams. That's my ultimatum to you. I will mock lizard folk believer until you show up. Anyway, the general vibe...
Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, right? The general vibe is that, like, we don't have that mechanism, and that mechanism can't exist if the state is the mechanism by which we're arbitrating. Because the state is that monopoly, and anybody who tries to crush that state as a form of monopoly will have the monopoly come to bear. And that state will gradually expand because it already assumed the ability and power and the right to decide who can do what and who can't. And because of all of that, it's basically going to be like, well, gosh darn it, we didn't want to increase our size, but those heckin' terrorists, those foreign sympathizers,
those slave-owning Southerners.
Yeah, well, and so, or the slave-freeing, like, whoever's, like, they'll always have a reason to expand, and they're not beholden to us. They never will be. And so that's my beef like, I wouldn't, you know, I'm not trying to interfere with people's ability to arbitrate between each other. What I am trying to say is that my beef is this idea that we're fighting like allegedly an irrational impulse to zero government because that irrational impulse might lead to too disorganized a society with too few protections. And simultaneously, we now have a very disorganized society with very few protections. And the only real organization seems to be, like, on any sort of institutional and reliable accountability level, is to protect the institutionalized, like, power of the state. So that's what I think we have, and I think it's also a natural sort of guaranteed result of what we had to begin with, and that's why they had to kick Thomas Paine in the balls, because his balls were too big, and they had to remove people with big balls.
I think my favorite argument against anarchy is that you always get the warlords argument, basically. In the absence of a state, what if other entities start acting kind of like the state?
Gosh!
Oh, wow, like the mafia might start demanding protection money. Okay, so basically you're just saying, okay, what if the state itself reforms?
Yeah, and like the other half of
And
that...
that's the thing, is it always would.
Without
Because-
public consent, though.
Because remember, we started out without government at all. I mean, government came out of anarchy. So people want rules, and they want to have them in place like that. And it's going
They
to
want rules.
eventually replicate itself. And
You
it's
don't
just
need
a
an
question of
entity
whether,
that has a monopoly on force, though. That's where you get problems.
but you would always end up having that. Because one's going to be bigger, somebody's going to be bigger than the other people and be willing to do the things that the others aren't. So eventually that's going to reform. It's just the nature of human existence right now. It's human nature. Until we change human nature, it's like there's a reason why communism doesn't work. And communism doesn't work because it ignores human nature. The same thing goes here, is that the idea of the anarchist society won't work because it ignores part of human nature. And that human nature is that people want to have rules in place that they
Well,
all agree to live by.
Generally, okay, just like, I'm just gonna say, like, I think human nature is a whole nother ball of wax. Because human nature, I can go absolutely off about human nature. I don't think it exists. But I think that's a subject maybe for, like, maybe we'll include that at the beginning of the next one of these that we do. Because I think that that's, like, just fucking 90 minutes on its own. But, like, so, like, that's my goal with this, is to say that, like, I think that a key element of problem here is to say that. It's to say that, yeah, I mean, what if warlords take over? I mean, because if we think about the way the government affects us here in this country, it might seem awesome. It might seem fucking awesome compared to the way government affects other people in other countries, right? But the way, like, our government built that is by exploiting other countries. The way this government... be well, Max Wellington. Feel free to show up for the next one as well. I will throw you a link.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that chat message to go through very fast. So, bye. Sorry.
Be well.
Good seeing you.
And like, so my deal with this specifically in particular is that I think that warlords have taken over, and that's the reason we have it so easy comparatively here. That's the reason we can look at fucking footage from Africa or Asia or South America and see a totally different picture of the world, see a totally different culture, a totally different way to be. Like, because that's the way that it is over there, because of the way it is over here. And as a result of the way it is over here, like, those places have been bombed, polluted, looted, raped, destroyed, like, fucking poisoned, irradiated. I could keep listing shit. And, like, you know, the general thing that I wanted to get out of this statement is, yeah, we might say that this government seems like it gave us optimal liberal blah blah, but liberalism and the cost of it, especially neoliberalism, has fucked the rest of the planet. And so for me, like, And so for me, like, I think my internet went out. Like, that fucking of the rest of the planet is all I need to be able to tell that the idea of government to prevent warlords is a farce. And I also want to say, it's this big for a reason. It's this big because we are now, like, you know, at the result of a later stage of empire. And we are at the result of a later stage of empire because that's the natural course of the state. So,
But you also have to understand one thing too, is that all the atrocities you're talking about, and the imperialism and everything else the United States has been done with the consent of the people. The majority of the people have agreed with it.
I do not consent.
I know you don't, but I'm talking about majority. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So
that's why you need a government, right?
Haven't agreed.
Get the minorities like me on board.
Like, okay, you're born, and so that somehow implies consent to the state.
what happens if you're born in an HOA?
Well, okay, and that's where we get into decentralization, because
This is a great anarchist
you know,
point.
in a highly decentralized society, it's easy to, you know, vote with your feet and move out.
In a
Can
highly
you do that now?
wealthy place where you have the ability to up and move out, yes, I would agree with you.
Just saying, like,
However, where I'm from, where there's people who can't even make it to the
harder than
grocery store, I would highly disagree with you. They are literally trapped.
edges on your property or something. I'm just saying, like, there's a degree of difference here. A government or a state that steals 30% of your income is considerably different than an HOA, where all you have to do is move a couple streets over that tells you you can't have plants of a certain variety.
Know what HOAs are, though. HOAs end up taking money out of your property tax. You get billed for HOA service fee in order to live there. You know, you get
HOAs are
taxed to live there.
$600, and when my association
Right. Well,
said
there's a reason
no
why
more
I-
increases, they
Right,
went to
but-
the governor, and we got more increases.
there's a-
Yeah, but that's the thing too, is that if you didn't have that government, how much is that HOA going to charge you? Because they're now going to be taking on the role that a lot of the government was doing, and they're going to start charging you a lot more than just a couple $100 a year. They're going to charge you about what, you know, probably the same is. You're going to end up with basically the same type of thing, because that's what the people have decided kind of is the way they want things to be. We
But we
don't like
voted on it.
that
We
because
said
we're
no.
minorities. We're in a minority view, but that's just kind of how do you
But
reconcile?
we're not. We voted. We won.
Yeah, like,
The
and
majority said no.
And just to be clear, like, that's one of the things, like, Hodie's bringing it up, and somebody else brought it up in chat. Leroy Essel from the Lars campaign chat says, interesting conversation since I voted for Ed Clark in 1980, who was excluded from presidential debates even though the Libertarian candidate was on the ballot in all 50 states. Like, that's the thing. You can have a big enough group of people to qualify for X, Y, and Z, and the state can still tell you to go fuck yourself.
If the people wanted Ed Clark in, they would have voted for him. He got fourth in that election too, didn't he?
Okay, but
Well, I mean, I guess that depends. I believe that our electoral system is legitimate. That's kind of a whole other can of worms, though.
yeah, we'll get onto the electoral system specifically,
Yeah.
certainly at some point.
Can we go back to the warlord thing momentarily?
Yeah, real quick though, Christopher Baker is here. Feel free to introduce yourself. You're muted and decammed, so.
Yes, Chris Baker is back. I have a show called The Fountainhead Forum. I've done 170 plus shows now. I've had Hodie. Hodie was my first show, by the way. He's never come back though, but and there's nobody in the English speaking podcast world who's covered Javier Milei more than I have. I have 42 shows about Milei just by himself. Anyway.
So I take it you're an objectivist, that if it's called the Fountainhead Forum?
I don't know what I am anymore. You know, I wanted to call it a forum, and I like alliteration, so I picked a word that has an F in it. You know, but I've never been more embarrassed by the word objective than I am today.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, look at like the Ayn Rand or the Objectivist Foundation or Ayn Rand Foundation, whatever they're calling themselves now.
Yeah, feel free to just
Here's
call it
something I want
triple
to say
F.
about Ayn
Call it
Rand.
FFF. Fucking Fountainhead Forum. That'd be.
There you go.
You know, this is something interesting. Ayn Rand never publicly wrote or said anything about goddamn fucking Israel until 1974.
Oh
Was
God.
Israel was hardly on her radar. And now that's all the people at the Ayn Rand Institute and the Objective Standard Institute talk about is Israel.
God. Yeah. Yeah. God. What an embarrassment.
You mean
Yeah.
You mean Yavin Book? Yeah, like a bunch of those people are part of that problem.
Yeah. Dave response to it is yeah.
Sorry, I think I ran you over, Rose. I couldn't.
Oh no. Go ahead.
No, I said what I mocked Yavin Book. That's all I did. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I was commenting on Yaron Brosh and his
Oh,
ridiculous
okay.
commentary on the Israel situation.
Yeah. So okay, moving to another. Actually, because Archie wanted to
So
say
Archie
something about
wanted to talk
warlords.
about the
Yeah,
warlords.
yeah.
Yeah. So, as the joke goes, you know, in the United States, we have a great deal of freedom. We can say, you know, fuck the president, fuck Joe Biden. And it's the exact same in Russia. Every citizen there can say, fuck Joe Biden. So here's my question to the warlord crowd. Do you want Joe Biden, who arguably is, you know, a type of warlord? I'm not gonna dispute that. Or do you want Kim Jong punch you with artillery warlord?
Yeah. There are
Kim Jong,
There's
because
a qualitative difference.
Kim Jong, because the other one is so it doesn't rub you enough to get people upset. It's kind of like the frog in the pot. I would rather have somebody who comes out and is obviously a despot, because in this country we still do have a Second Amendment, so we can stand up to tyranny if we needed to. I would rather them do that rather than take away the Second Amendment slowly and erode it and erode it and erode it, and then reveal themselves to be the power despot. So I would absolutely rather have Kim Jong-un, because I would only have him for a very short amount of time, or I wouldn't be on this earth to
Hey,
bother with it.
Man,
So,
you don't gotta
We
make
were
short
free to
jokes.
move there.
Well,
I-
what are they going to do if Kim?
you know-
What they're not going to resist obvious tyranny because they didn't do that 4 years ago.
Yeah, true. But also, like, you don't gotta make a short joke. I get it. It's Kim Jong Un, but sorry. Go ahead.
Oh God, that almost went over my head.
and I'm not the one to say that about, because I fully think that the election was stolen, as Jeremiah knows. So don't tell me that people voted for it, because I don't think they did.
They voted against.
I
him.
don't
That's what
think-
they did.
Well, I don't care anyway. They're basically interchangeable, and you know they've been rigging the election against third parties and such for 30 years, and the stupid animals have never cared about those riggings. So why would they care if they start rigging it against major parties? We have rigged elections, and 95% of Americans don't care, and that's the problem.
They're all rigged. It's
Just like the Kim Jong-un thing we said, if it affected everyone, they would care. The problem is that it's in small groups and it happens in small isolated pockets, and it's not enough for everybody to get upset about. So then it slowly allows the erosion of the rights.
Talking
Rose?
about anarchy again.
Oh, no, I was agreeing that, yeah. I mean, the electoral system is beyond rigged. It's always been rigged. The rigging is normally done at the primary level. So by the time you get to election night, like the two parties, or the two candidates, I mean, yeah, both of them genuinely do want to win. So they are competing against each other, but it does not matter which one actually wins, because they're both, you know, corporate Wall Street backed war criminals at the end of the day.
Yeah. And Scourge, by the way, you asked, do black people want to be repatriated? No, this was directly in response to black people Kaufman didn't like, so he decided to be a racist cunt about it. And Leroy says in chat, he had to bounce, so I'm going to address what he said real quick here. Centralized oil and gas funds terror and war. The decentralized Arex tech can compete with fossil fuels, turning water or waste plastic into synthetic fuels. That might be interesting. At some point, maybe I'll talk about that. But also said, consider back. We can compete with petrol dollar, with hydrogen dollar, because Arex Canada has new breakthrough using cavitation of any type of water or contaminated waste plastic into synthetic fuels. Yeah, we could maybe talk about that at some point. That sounds interesting. I'm less on the tech side, but I'm definitely interested to talk about that at some point. Maybe I'll just have you on at some point to talk some of this tech you're interested in. Skurs says, I may have a computer science degree myself, because he brought up the C joke. And also says, people doing shit is where the power lies. The paper is used to convince them of what to do.
I don't think there are technological solutions to get rid of war.
Well, no, that's a cultural thing. We start from a cultural basis there, and that starts with not being, xenophobic, jingoistic, otherwise bigoted pieces of shit. Something that a lot of Libertarian Party members need to work on, to be very specific. John, did you want to?
I think war.
Wait.
I think
was
war
just going
comes
to make
from
a joke.
I think war comes from for a desire for righteous violence.
Often, but that desire for righteous violence.
Desire to commit violence in the nature of a righteous cause.
Yeah, but oftentimes that involves convincing people that their cause is righteous when it's anything but. So.
Well, if it was a righteous cause, they wouldn't need to be violent.
Sure, unless of course the people they're being violent to are the people who might, there's definitely just violence. There's like if somebody shoots a guy who's trying to rape their wife or kid, I have zero qualms with that. That person is a waste of every resource that was used to make them. So it's something like that. It's one of those things where there's some sort of there's a point at which there's an acceptable use of violence. So. There is righteous violence.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And everybody all the people who engage in violence try to act like violence was forced upon them, like these idiots who say, "Oh, words are bullets." No, words are not bullets.
And Leroy Essel says, culture is sinking the USA like the Roman Empire. Well, okay, here's where I'm maybe diverge with you, Leroy, because fuck Rome, and I'm glad it fell. Anytime somebody compares the U.S. to the Roman Empire and says, this is how Rome fell, I'm like, hey, great, then fuck this joint too. Oh yeah, I'm so sad that the world's biggest empire in history might be experiencing an owie. I'll be sure to go kiss the boo-boo. No, culture is great if it's felling an empire. Great, fuck empires, fuck imperialism.
Well, the founding fathers tried to learn something from the fall of Rome. They really studied Rome a lot.
Yeah, that's
it was the only thing they had to study.
Go. Christopher, what are you saying? Okay. I think maybe Christopher can't hear me.
You were cutting in and out.
I think maybe we were going through a tunnel.
No, I'm outside. I'm not in a tunnel.
Okay, well, what were you going to say?
It's the chemtrails then. Sorry.
Yeah, right?
I was just saying that the founding fathers studied Rome a lot. Really, it was about the only thing they could study. There wasn't a whole lot of recorded history at the time.
Yeah, right?
Did study the Indian tribes as well, too. So there's a lot of stuff we kind of borrow from them as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess the point is we have a whole lot more recorded history now than we did then. When America falls, trust me, I can imagine people will be studying America for a very long time.
And we ignore all of that. So that's the bad part is we keep repeating all the bad things that happen. Repeat history constantly. So.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, everything that we're doing right now is almost identical to what we were doing and saying 100 years ago in this country. It's amazing. America first, the rise of the second KKK, fascism, that sort of thing is all happening and repeating itself right now. Anti-immigration, etc.
And supporting and funding foreign fascists.
This is one thing I'm really concerned about with the liberty movement is the anti-immigration bullshit.
Yeah.
I really it's very disconcerting.
Yeah.
Well, it just comes across as pandering, but I mean, this is where you see, libertarians at like. I mean, this is where we're at our most theoretical. Like, 'cause in theory, yeah, obviously there should be no state, so there should be no national border. But then so many people get caught up on the fact that, okay, but currently we live under a heavily centralized state with, with taxes and with, welfare programs. So therefore, we shouldn't have unchecked immigration. It's not that they're wrong about that. It's just that, well, okay, militarizing the border is not the answer. That's just giving state more power, which is going to be used against you.
Especially
and if they really cared about welfare, they'd deport the citizens and let the immigrants in, right? I mean, if they're being consistent and they actually care about the welfare, and that's the reason for it, right?
Yeah.
As far my theory is that they keep the welfare state to use it as a rationalization for hating immigrants. I mean, if I put a sign in my front yard that says free food inside, and that's my own damn fault if I got a bunch of people knocking on my door. And the solution isn't to put on better locks or put bars on the windows. It's to take down the damn sign.
And it's also to stop fucking up their houses. Because the reason they don't have food is because of fucking you, U.S. government bitches. Yeah. Fuck you.
In some cases, yes, I agree. We've certainly messed up Mexico enough times. We've messed up Haiti enough times. Although I don't know if Haiti is fixable, but anyway.
And of course, all the Middle Eastern places that are like getting a bunch of refugees from there, not only in the U.S. but in Europe, and then a bunch of like racists say that, "Ooh, these brown people are here now. Ooh, I'm so upset." But it's like they didn't want to leave. Yeah, they didn't want to leave. You made them leave. Shut the fuck up.
We certainly did a lot to destabilize these countries. There's no doubt about that. That's not all of them, but that's a lot of them.
Yeah. And by the way, Leroy Essel says, I feel like I'm listening to the Founding Fathers. Well, great. I am the Founding Fathers who says cunt a lot. So, welcome. Kant says...
So Ben Franklin, I'm assuming.
Thomas Paine, more like, but I mean, Ben had some based ideas as well. Kant Lonathew says the Czech could be a part of the development of the culture, and also says he would argue that such in its source requires a development of sound ethical attitudes and actions based on freedom and flourishing.
So I'm going to bring up a couple points here, and I know we've kind of, now that you're bringing culture back into it, there have been, if you look up, you can go to Wikipedia right now. You go every single anarchist society that has existed. And everybody's like, oh, anarchy won't work. Oh, it's a cute little idea to whatever. Every single one of them, you can look it up now because I've had to do it myself, has been destroyed by an outside source. The idea that anarchy falls because of internal problems is comically untrue, historically. I understand why we think that way, because we live in a government system, and that seems to keep things together. But the idea that government is actually like barely holding this thing together as people like tear themselves into chaos is actually remarkably untrue. And the cooperation among people that naturally occurs is a great thing. When we talk about developing a positive culture, I really want to be careful to not say that that's a natural thing. Children will steal, they will lie, and you do not have to teach them to do those things. They will punch somebody in the face for some candy, and you have to be like, hey, that person has feelings. Like, come on now. Culture is a thing that we do have to develop, but it's best that we develop as a society and not as politicians. The idea that politicians will somehow keep this whole thing in control, again, pretty farcical when you look at it. When you say, normally what they do is they take, the majority of the people are engaging in this really terrible behavior. Let's codify that. Let's make them my future voters, as opposed to, hey, let's push back on that, on the majority of people. Oh, shoot, now I'm out of office, and they went and voted for the guy who wanted more of that bad thing. And so these people don't deal with the market consequences or the social consequences because they have politicians. And finally, the last thing I wanted so nature is not always good, right? Like, and the last thing I wanted to say here, because I think it's really important, is there was some pushback that some people are too dumb to be able to, and they need a government because they're stupid, or they need some sort of rules or contracts or constitution or whatever because they're stupid. And me as a Christian, this is one of those things that I strongly feel that Christ was there not for the intellectual elite. Yes, there are people who love to read the Bibles and the scriptures. We're actually told, though, that Christ did not mention the scriptures at all in his ministries, and that he only spoke in parables. That's literally in the Bible, that when he spoke to the people, he only spoke to them in parables. And his rationale for doing so was because even these dummies can understand what the right thing to do is, and they don't necessarily need your hand-holding. In fact, government's a great way for these dummies to suddenly be like, well, I don't know what the right thing to do is. What's the law? As opposed to getting a parable or a story of some kind of understanding. I was like, oh, you're right. That does hurt my neighbor. That seems like not the right thing to do. The Lord rejoices in simplicity. I especially promote anarchy because I am so against the intellectual elites ruling this world. Every time the intellectual elites try to take over and think they know what's best for everybody, they prove over and over that sometimes that dummy who was like, you know what, I just wanted to take care of my family and have my church and have my mutual aid society and have my community. And I might not know it's called mutual aid society, but gall darn it, I really like it when Bobby brings me pickles and I give him peaches in return, and that seems all great to me. And yeah, he might be too dumb for these deep philosophical arguments. These people might not be on this call, but this is not an excuse for a crushing tyranny over that human being to govern his lifestyle and the way he wants to trade pickles for peaches. This is actually the exact opposite excuse. That these people, what makes them so good and what makes anarchy such a cool concept is that you don't have to be a genius to figure it out. This is one of the big reasons I'm a Christian. You don't have to be a genius to figure it out. Jesus wasn't always like, is somebody writing this down? Hey, this is going to be important. Make sure it's said word for word. In the Gospels, we get several different versions of the same story of Jesus. The idea isn't that everybody wrote it down perfectly. It's that people understood the general concept. Great example. When your child falls into a well and they made it illegal for you to work on Sunday, right? So you can't jump in the well and get that child. We don't know the exact interpretation of that verse. Sometimes it's your child, sometimes it's an ox, sometimes it's your wagon, sometimes it's a goat. Okay, fine. We don't know the exact interpretation. All you high intellectual elites, while you want to like decipher the words of the gospel. The point of it is it's okay to stop something from drowning or from losing something if it's sinking into a well. Common sense would let you do that if you see your child drowning. It's the law that says, well, it's Sunday. I guess I better let him die then. And this is what government does over and over again. And I don't understand why, when we say this, we look at how are we going to fix government? Look at how many resources it takes, look how expensive it is, and look how futile it is as we try over and over. There's many great ideas, I'm sure, in this chat about how we could fix government. Great. Now get your politicians on board with it. Now get the police on board with it. Now get everybody on board with it in the entire nation. It won't happen. Focus on the culture. That's something you can fix. You started at home. You started at your communities. You get that fixed. And then all of a sudden things get to be a lot better. And this is, I know it might seem anti-human nature, but humanity exists because of anti-human nature. We embrace this new life that we find when we say, yeah, I'm not just going to kill everybody that's not me because everybody's a threat. We like people. We learn to love people. And that learning is something that will continue forever. It won't be a utopia. I agree with the status on that one. It's going to be utopia. But I would argue that this process is a hell of a lot better than outsourcing it to politicians and the police.
I think that I fully agree with a lot of the things you say. And what you said, as far as the pushback goes, I think I was very careful earlier to say that these people are not too dumb to participate. I think it's more tedious and people are unwilling to have conversations with people because they feel like they're too dumb to participate. So I want to make sure that that's clear. But also, essentially what you're saying is that we should fix the culture and then the common sense will be fixed because of the culture. And I would argue that that's been tried. The Catholic Church tried fixing the culture to fix the religion, and that didn't, to fix the government, and that didn't really work. So essentially, if you try to come at it from the perspective of what you're coming from, you were arguing for the same thing, just from a spiritual way instead of a power way. And neither of those are going to work because obviously most of us in here agree that power is not a valid form of like something to hold over each other. But there's also an equal or more amount of people out in the world that agree that religion is also not that, or a higher power. So yet again, we have to have this conversation because what you're proposing is essentially religion. And we have tried that over and over and over again. And it does work in some situations. There's some societies that a religious-based society actually worked out really well for them. I would say the Amish, they work in certain ways and they don't work in other ways. They're very oppressive in other ways, but then there's some things that they're very, very good at because of the way that their system works. So I think that's where I would push back on the other. I think that where I come from on the intelligence part is that we assume that everyone will think like we do. But if you look at like Yeonmin Park and what she will describe that happens in North Korea, you're right. Like these people are not taught that things are good. So some people will think, and I know there's pushback, but it's if you can be taught to not love your own child from birth because that's just the way that your society works, then you're absolutely correct that these things are taught and they are ingrained, I would think. Even if Yeonmin is not...
because
I know some people don't like her,
I'm
but...
just going to say, if you can find any other source for any claim about North Korea than Yeonmi Scammer Park, she is just a scammer.
Well, but we can look at the drone footage and see that these people are literally... did you see the drone footage that came out
you can look at it
on Reddit a couple days ago?
You can look at like alleged drone footage, but it doesn't show what the actual culture regarding like whether or not they love their babies is.
Well, true. I'll give you that. But let's assume that that's true because it is true. Like, okay, we've seen other places where a disregard for human life or a lesser, even in American culture in the past, where a lesser life is less important, and then that can be taught and ingrained into someone. So I agree that the culture is half of the battle, but I think that it is half of the battle. And to try to say that is kind of the solution, I think that you do have to have a minimal amount of state because of the people who are not going to come from the side of you. They're not going to come from unfortunately, common sense is not common. And we can change the things that inform common sense. But until that gets filtered out and people's ideas change, it's never going to work to just assume that they will come to the same conclusion as you because it is what's right or wrong, just from a gut perspective, if that makes sense.
Sure, of course. And I think the thing is when we talk about what I am pushing as a religion, sure, but as long as it's voluntary, this is a point. So a lot of like with the primitive church, the reason the Roman Empire had to violently put them down is because when they were just voluntarily coming together, people would want to join. It's when you find a loving culture and something that cares about your food and your prosperity and your living situation. And I mean, emotionally too, your loneliness, they care about your anger, they care about where you are in life and your status. That when you find a society that cares about this, people do gravitate towards that. Now, you might say, well, people need to get learnt. Well, even on and they might need to get learnt. I'm not disagreeing, but I think when you see that society is also willing to take care of your needs better than the state does, which was the big issue, that you want to be a part of that. And I think that is voluntary, which is a huge part of this process, is that I think voluntary cultures, I can have a small, minuscule, positive culture that feeds people, that cares about people, that loves people. And I mean, this is the reason like the state is so avant-garde about shutting down, like when you do something like Food Not Bombs, or when your church tries to house the homeless, like they will pound that bad because that's one of the, like, they will respond to that. And unless you're armed, they will continue to hound it. And the rationale for that is, of course, that's one of the most direct affronts that you can do to the state. That's way more violence against the state than throwing a brick through their windows, because they see, oh, this is a society that not only can take care of itself, but people want to be a part of. I'm not arguing everybody will. It's voluntary. There are a lot of people who didn't join the primitive Christian church. They said, I would rather have Caesar and I would rather have less food. I just don't think that's the majority, and so this is why the state puts that kind of thing down.
And also, so two things: Scott, and then Dennis, and then Rose, because I think you also have something. Scott, go.
Oh no, I'm good.
Hey there. Sorry, there was a lot in there. Yeah, so I'm John, you were mentioning the problem with relying on the culture for enforcing norms and the necessity of the state as a result of the fact that not everyone will agree. But have sufficient cultural consensus for a norm, what additional role does the state play?
I think that that's what we were going back to before. For me, I feel like that is more because I think that there's a very, very loose framework that would constitute a state if I wanted one. But to go back, I think to what we were referencing earlier, having that README, having the public consensus written down somewhere for people to go back and look and be able to reference, like, this is the rule book that we're playing on right now, because some people just do not operate on. I think that if you look at like personality tests, you actually can be scored on whether you are more likely to think freely or to look to other people for guidance and instruction, if that makes sense. So I think it's difficult, and it was very difficult for me for a long time, for me to understand that some people just do not want to have this conversation. Some people do not want to have this responsibility, and some of them want to just look to something else. I think that's the reason why people are drawn to religion a lot of times. We see that a lot of times in AA and stuff like that. My wife's a substance abuse counselor. You see a lot of people who were not religious that are just literally at the point where they just need something to help them. And if that is, even if you don't believe in religion, the old joke is that you can believe in the holy, you can believe the squirrel outside in the tree is God. The point is to be able to unload that off of yourself emotionally, because some people just operate better that way. So to have that central document where we're saying, hey, this is the rule book we're all agreeing on, and that may not be useful to you, but that may be useful to a large swath of the population. But then we have to have the conversation about how do we form that, whether it's a DAO or whatever, but how do we form the initial, what is that README, what's included in it, and how do we update that or change it as technology and society changes, and get to the point of having that conversation, because we want to argue that there is a one size fits all for everybody, and my solution is going to work for everyone. Whereas I really do think that it's going to take a middle ground approach that may not be perfect for anybody, but may be the best solution for the most amount of people. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm a big believer in negative rights, like we talked about before. So this README should never be you're going to do this, you're going to be compelled to do this. It's hey, we all agree that murder's not okay. Hey, we all agree that you can't steal from your neighbor. You can't tax them in these ways because it's predatory or whatever. So that's where I'm coming from. I don't necessarily think that it takes a state to enforce it. I think that society could enforce those rules. I just think that we have to have a set thing that we're all looking to. I think religion uses that with either a religious text, or they do it with some sort of bureaucracy. So like you have different levels of that. You may have one church that's just a local congregation, or it may be as large as the Catholic Church that controls, congregations across the world, and you're going to have that difference of opinion. But I think to have a central set of rules that we all just look to and go, okay, this is the common sense that we're running on right now, and if the majority of people look at it and go, yeah, this is stupid, we have an ability to change it. So I guess that's where I'm coming from. I don't necessarily think you have to have an army to come in and enforce those rules. I think that through the markets and through public shaming, the cancel culture, as some people want to call it, and everything else, I think that those things will naturally be enforced because we all agree that, hey, certain things are just not okay.
Two things. First off, what you're talking about, like, to me, sounds more like market anarchy or anarcho-capitalism than it does like minarchist libertarianism. And then the second thing is, Dennis.
So a couple things. One is the Amish were brought up as an example of things, where it kind of works. What we don't often talk about is that the Amish society does have a mafia in place, and they do run things in a specific kind of way that's contrary to what their stated goals of running the society are. So we have to see that that ends up happening in those societies. The second is there's a reason the anarchist societies that have failed because of outside forces, as Cody mentioned. That's part of what I was talking about when we talked about the failure of the Articles of Confederation. When you have too small of an area that doesn't have mutual understanding of defense of the society that they have in place, you're going to end up getting taken over. I mean, you can just go back and look at what happened to the the Native Americans when we came here, and they had a lot of different tribes. We would just start taking over one by one, as opposed to them working together as a united nation to say, okay, we have some basic defense that we're going to do, some basic understanding of rights that are going to be protected. And if one of us are getting attacked, then the rest of us will come together in that aid. And that's really why I think the state comes into play as a function to protect those individual tribes from being taken over one by one like that. And so that's where I think you need to have the balance at, right? So look, we talked about recently, there's been talk about Texas seceding from the nation. What do you think is going to happen when if that happens? If for some reason Texas were to say, okay, we're no longer part of the United States government, now you've got a large area with a lot of resources, especially oil, sitting right on the border of the United States. What do you think the United States is going to do? They're going to take it over and turning it into a new Puerto Rico. And you're going to have less rights there than you had currently. So we have to be understanding and careful of the ideas that we're going to put in place. And I think the real goal should be for us to try to fix both the current society that we have, the current government that we have, and try to institute into people's minds a better way forward as well. Kind of need to focus on doing both of those things, because if we don't, it's not going to, one or the other is not going to happen. One or the other is not going to work. We get buy-in by trying to fix the current government that we have to make it more like we want it to be. And we try to institute and do voluntary stuff. Like I've said millions of times, if you want to get rid of welfare, you go out and you implement a non-government organization that does the same thing better without politics in place to then take over that function. And when you do that and you prove that it works, people will say, well, we don't need a government doing this anymore. We'll move that over to this function. And that's
why the government stops you from doing that, right?
I know, but the thing is that people get locked into this thing about the government has this complete control. But if enough people do rise up and say no, we have the ultimate power. We just do not coordinate and do it enough. I mean, if you look at it currently, we've got 35 to 40% of the population who are okay with putting a fascist dictator in place.
Yeah.
Whether it's Trump or anybody else, they're okay with it. If you look at the polling, it is. If you look at, I'm just saying, if there's polling out there right now, or say they like 60% of Republicans are okay with a dictator, not Trump, just to say, hey, if somebody had ultimate power, you'd be okay with that? And they're like, yeah, that'd be cool, because it would fix a lot of the problems they see.
They think it'll serve their interests.
Yeah, exactly.
Who agrees, but they don't seem to realize the precedent that they're setting. Yeah, it's going to backfire, as it does every single fucking time.
Right. So the concern is that we need to get there, but as Hody says, we have to change the culture. In both cases, in either fixing the current government or instituting a more of an anarchist style government. Either way, we're going to have to change that culture to get us in that place. And I think that by a double-pronged approach of going both directions, we're going to affect the most people into seeing the message and doing something about it and getting it fixed, right? And get more people on board.
And two things. First off, Leroy brings up a good point about central bank digital currency, CBDC. I have brought this up so many fucking times. The thing is, like, that's going to be a linchpin. That's going to be a fucking last thing in the fucking last nail in the coffin of a lot of freedoms. And unless people are willing to start putting their skin on the line and, like, doing rough things in order to skirt YouTube censorship, they are going to lose a lot of headway. especially since the common person is going to be incentivized to accept the CBDC for a variety of reasons, accept the CBDC and get, $25 worth of free groceries, accept the CBDC and get this discount at this place. They like trialed certain things like this by saying, get the jab and you'll get X, Y, and Z. So for me, the CBDC is going to be one of the ways that they use to absolutely jam the culture. So one of the things that we could do immediately to begin the process of forestalling that shit is that, and we should start to forestall that process. And I've been saying that for a long time. Like, before we've spoke, Dennis, I have been fucking annoying on streams like this about, like, oh, just do it. Just go start helping people. Go start making these communities. Go start making what I call pockets of freedom. And that's what we're going to need to do. We're going to need to make these pockets of freedom. I have been fucking obnoxious about that, telling this to so many fucking people. So, like, that's been what's been on. Like, Rose has been, Hody has been there, just listening to me, fucking just, yeah, do it. Just do it. Shia LaBeouf style. And that's what I think needs to happen in a lot of these cases, is people just, they talk too much. It's too much. And so the culture needs to be demonstrated. If nobody thinks that, like, they'll be able to get what they want out of a libertarian society, or get what they even need, then they'll just say, yeah, well, fuck it, I'm getting something here. And like, while we were talking about that, Kant in chat says, I think it's a bit of a simplification, because human nature, if it does exist, is at least in part malleable regarding social organization. Herbert Marcuse uses the term second to nature, that nature is created by our social conditions and is not inherent or universal to the human condition. At some point, hey, Kant, at some point, I've got to have you actually on here. You're very smart. You underestimate.
He always comments in the chat but never joins.
He should. He's very fucking smart. That's something that I've been saying for a while.
Yeah, I like what he comments.
Yeah. And Scourge says, government is instituted among men to secure our rights, and when it becomes destructive to those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Yeah, basically. Yeah. Also, I don't know who they were saying goodbye to, but I guess goodbye to you as well. Kant says also, Chomsky talked about that regarding manufactured consent, and it's a question of individual rights contrasting with pressures of social pressures into organization. Yeah. And Scourge says the majority didn't consent either. You need a system that doesn't require consent. Yeah, like, and that's the thing. To me, even if, because the vast majority of people didn't vote. Like, not the vast majority, but a majority of people didn't vote for a president. They might have voted more for, like, more local elections or whatever. But, like, the vast majority of people didn't even vote for a president the last 2 elections. Not vast. I keep saying vast. I'm very tired. So, like, the majority of people were, like, either not voting or voted nota, so that they could vote on other propositions and shit. And the people who did get in were the people who got the most funding. Like, most of the time, the people who win the presidency, or the Congress seats, are the people who have had the most thrown at their campaigns. And then when you get those people on board, you get those people with a bunch of fucking money, because, like, oh yeah, there's money in politics, and, like, when those people with that money are throwing money at certain politicians, it's because those politicians are going to be good for their bottom line. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I can't get behind the idea that, like, we are being represented because the majority asked for it. I think the majority asked for very specific things, because they wanted very specific things, and the politicians had to lie to get those specific things promised, and then broke those promises. And the politicians were ultimately funded by people who, like, were incentivized to incentivize their lies, because those incentives were baked in by helping them be corrupt bastards. And so, like, the whole deal, I think, is recognizing, like, the systemic, like, flaws there. Like, Leroy Essel in chat says centralized oil and gas funds terror and war. Kant says the issue is we're still working within the framework of these forms of governance based on domination and the self-interest of these organizations. Yeah.
But I still think you bring up a point though that gets misconstrued. A lot of people didn't vote for president in the last election. But if you're given the choice to vote and you choose not to, you're making an implicit approval of what the ultimate outcome is. There's always a chance.
No, you aren't.
Right?
Exactly.
Let's just say if all the people who didn't vote had said, no, we're all going to vote for the Libertarian candidate or Mickey Mouse or somebody else, that would have disrupted everything. That would have disrupted the whole election, and they would have had to have dealt with it. They don't have to deal with it when they convince you that your voice doesn't matter. The politicians are convincing you that you can't change it, therefore you don't try. That's a real problem.
Okay,
in my opinion.
but here's
because like I said, if
It doesn't say they agree with what's going on. It says they're demoralized.
true, they're true, but they are giving implicit consent to it. Though.
No.
I mean they have the voice.
Absolutely.
Implicit consent is not a thing. Do not have sex with somebody who's unconscious.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like using this concept of consent, you can justify all manner of unimaginable horrors.
But I think you're taking it the wrong way when I'm meaning it. What I'm saying is that we have the choice to do something. If all those people who didn't vote because they're told that their voices count, they're demoralized or whatever, they're convinced of this by the politicians that they don't have a voice. If they had all risen up and said something, we would have had a whole different result in the last two elections at least.
Or we wouldn't have, because the state doesn't give a shit what we think to begin with, and that's why that little blue line went above that red line. Scott, you had your hand up, though.
But they don't care.
I think what
They don't care
Reinhold
about
is saying, if I may,
Hmm.
is that Congress is what, 435 people. The president is one person. If 330 million Americans don't give the same shit that they don't give about us, who's going to win? 330 million, clearly, hands down. They win because we are not unified.
Okay, but we should unify around not ruling each other. If we can't, then it'll just be unifying. Like, if we can't unify around that concept of freedom and not violating other people's autonomy, then those people are not going to vote libertarian. And if they do, that libertarian vote is going to be thrown out by the people who do support the system. So that's my thing. And also, Scott, I don't want to trample on what you were saying. So you can get some time, and then I will shut the fuck up. Dennis can respond to anything that was said.
I just want to make two quick points. First of all, participation in the system is ratification of the result. It is exactly the opposite of consenting to the result by not participating. If you can avoid engaging in something that is systematically evil and guaranteed not to go your way, the correct way to protest that thing is not to participate in it, not to show up and vote for Mickey Mouse. And furthermore, there's sufficient historical evidence at this point, well documented, that the result is pretty much predetermined. You can show up and be like, let's take a more realistic possible outcome than a libertarian win at this point in history, and look at the Bernie Sanders campaign. Huge popular support, and extensive funding, even still. But the tiny little variation from the current power system was enough to get the system to shut him down entirely. Going and showing up as an individual without a particular, particularly privileged access to the political system and voting for somebody is not going to make a significant change. The rational decision is not to participate in the least, and the ethical decision is not to participate. So wrong on both counts with regard to consent and effectiveness.
And if you don't show up and vote, what happens?
It doesn't matter.
The people who win, right? The people who end up winning have to convince fewer people to vote for them. You make it easier for them to do this to you by not participating.
The problem is that you're both creating evidence for each other, because by not showing up to vote, it's secular. By not showing up to saying, yeah, but nobody came to vote, so we don't know what the outcome would have been if we had all been together. Then his argument is, well, we already know what the outcome would have been. So if he had gone and voted and then it reinforced it and the predetermined outcome had come true, then it creates more evidence for him. So this is one of those arguments that really can never be won in a theoretical sense, because both create evidence for each other over and over and over again.
And then
the facts.
Go Dennis.
Yeah. Even if for some reason, let's say we all decided that all the people who didn't vote for president in 2020 had all agreed to vote for somebody else. They all agreed that's that one person, Bernie Sanders, whoever. And if they vote for that person and the system says, no, we're not going to honor that, now you've got evidence of a real corruption being taken place. If you have 2% of the people or 1% of the people voting for a libertarian and a bunch of other people voting for some others, and that's it, then they could say, well, that was just the thing. But if you come in with that large of a number, it becomes harder for them to ignore it, for the other people in the country to ignore it. And then you can start the conversation and an uprising and the things that you need to do to make changes. If you don't have that number, if you don't have that proof, because all the people can say right now is that, we just have people who are apathetic. They don't care. Right. So there's nothing we need to change. Unless you make your voice heard, you're not going to be able to affect that change in the current system. So then you get despondent and say, okay, we just need to change the system. But if you can't change the system now, what makes you think you're going to get enough people to support you to change the system the other way?
So,
right. They would just... Okay, anyone who pointed out the obvious rigging would just be called a far-right conspiracy theorist. The MSM would, be going on about how, these people aren't credible. They, I'm sorry. It's just,
So if I may.
That's self-defeatist right there.
May I jump in here?
Yeah.
So, Rose, are you saying that if somehow we fluked it and Reinhold is right, that we had, let's call it 75 million voters for Jed Bartlett?
What if Joe Jorgensen had won in 2020?
No. Hold on. 75 million voters for Jed Bartlett, 74 million for Joe Biden, and 73 million for Trump. You're saying that the media is going to spin away 75 million people going to the polls?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Because that's a hell of a claim.
Votes necessary to put their favorite corporate or predetermined corporate packed, Wall Street elite war criminal in office. And then anyone who dares question the results will just be called a far right, Russia-funded conspiracy theorist.
I think that is not in touch with reality.
I think it's pretty in touch with reality.
I get called a MAGA shill every day on Twitter because I watched them steal votes in Georgia. Okay. I watched it happen, and nobody's been able to give me any evidence to back what I watched. Yet I will be called a MAGA hat, even though I was literally running his competitor's campaign in the state. Somehow I still support him just because I questioned what I saw.
Yes. Okay.
And yet that's not the scenario that we just outlined.
I will point out that there was so much shady shit that happened during the 2020 election. You don't have to be a Trump supporter to point that out.
Yeah. And John watched it personally.
Was there three camps?
Really winning, and then in the middle of the night, a handful of critical swing states just stopped counting their votes.
Was there three camps with roughly the same? Within one order of magnitude or within one group, 1 decade million of each other, were there three camps that voted? No, there were not. There were two. There was Democrat and Republican. We are not talking the same scenario.
Okay, but there actually has been in previous elections reason to believe that votes are being siphoned from the third parties. I mean, that's kind of a,
No,
it doesn't matter anyway because they will offset it.
Has been anywhere near the numbers we're talking about.
It's inconsequential because they will change the total. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Like, it does
so
not matter in Georgia how
exit
many votes that Joe Jorgensen stole. They
Exit
still
polls.
offset off 11,000 votes overnight. It does not matter where Joe Jorgensen stole those votes from. They ensured to add 11,000 votes to ensure that the person they wanted to win the state won the state. So it doesn't matter. We could have had somebody who stole 30% from somewhere. They would have figured it out. And that's what I watched. So, like, to say the otherwise is to deny reality. And that's the reason why I keep asking people, I want to be proven wrong. I want someone in Georgia to tell me
John.
what happened. The problem is
John.
that people tell me what. Go ahead.
Okay, I can answer your questions, but I don't think we should do it here. Let you and I get together and I can go through what happened there and how that's been debunked and what happened, etc. I studied that extensively for years.
Debunked.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't trust
Yes.
who uses the term debunked.
Especially,
I know you don't.
Especially
What's wrong
when,
with that term?
But-
especially when they won't like talk about the been debunked on air. Like, if there's a link you can provide, then do that.
Okay, I am not prepared to do that right now. I don't have a list of links right here, and I'm not. This is the problem: is I can't come on here and go against 5 other people and say, "Here's all the evidence I have," and make a rational discussion about that without being prepared to do that.
I mean,
So
no.
that's what I'm saying is I can do it on air. I'll do it, but me and John can do it on air in front of everybody,
Okay.
and I can go through all this stuff. I need to be prepared to do it.
We can
You know what I'm saying?
Then we can do that next week. Absolutely. And to be clear, the reason I'm pushing back is because of the not in touch with reality comment. Like, that's borders on gaslighting speech. It's telling somebody that their like experiences with reality are not real. And
Okay, I said
But
that
what- but
comment,
what
and
is-
I will
this is
defend
not-
that comment, and I will die on that hill, because we're not talking about the same scenario.
it
If we're
doesn't matter.
talking about,
It doesn't matter if it's not the same, if it's comparable.
Yeah.
But isn't it gaslighting
my
to
dear
say
Lord.
it doesn't matter what you'll do, they'll fix it anyway? Isn't that gaslighting too?
That's
No.
reality.
how many
guess-
votes did
Only
Jorgensen
Really?
get?
people that
Because
know-
I watched Ross Perot just about destroy a 92 election.
Yeah, you're-
How many votes did Jorgensen get? 4 million, right? Roughly? 3 million? 3.5? How many did she get?
I don't know. I wasn't watching.
It was
She
about
got about
3.5,
a
wasn't
million.
it?
It was
And
like
we
two,
agreed
I
that it was
think.
about 3.5?
I think it was like 2.
No, she didn't get that many.
Yeah.
Okay,
it was
2
like 2.
million.
don't actually give a shit about any of this.
I think it was more like
No,
a
no, no,
million
no,
and
no,
a
no.
half.
Is
Facts matter. Facts matter.
Yeah, but facts don't say that it's not reality to say that things are fixed in favor of certain candidates.
If somebody's at your computer,
hear
they
me
look it
out.
up on
Hear me out. Hear me
Wikipedia.
out, please. Because we're talking about, we're talking about 2 completely different scenarios. The 2020 campaign did not go the way that Reinhold was talking about.
Okay, but that's
We're
not.
talking about like, okay, so 2 million is what Jorgensen got. I'm talking about someone getting 70 to 80 million that is comparable. You have 3 people getting roughly that many votes. There's that many votes out there to get. Okay.
Yeah.
Instead, you have 2 major sections of the country and then 1 sitting home. Okay.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is burying 70 to 80 million votes. That's not doable. That's my contention. You
Or-
cannot bury 70 million voices.
Or, and here's the other half of it, like there's such strong electoral capture that they wouldn't need to bury them because they can simply convince people, like they have so many other times, that voting for a third party is throwing your vote away, and then throwing so much money at those like voters who are considering that third option by running ads in favor of certain politicians. Like, here's where I get to piss off Chris. Like, you know, something like Millet saying that he is an anarcho-capitalist, a third-party libertarian, somebody who's going to come in and change everything, get us off the globalism and the blah blah. And then he gets in, there's a facial recognition superstate, there's, you know, like police brutality, there's like criminalization of protest,
Joining NATO, even though they're not in the North Atlantic.
yeah, and like, you know, the support of Ukraine and Israel, and the like drug war support through Patricia Bullrich, and the enabling of cops to shoot civilians easier during protests, and the banning of sticks at protests and facial coverings, and the scanning the faces of protesters to add them to lists of people to prosecute later, and the general like draw up of physical force in the region, and him saying Israel didn't do anything wrong with its genocide of Palestinians, and his gradual support of the mainstream agenda, including saying at the end of his World Economic Forum speech that the people there are the real protagonists of the story, and Argentina is their total uncompromising ally. So like, you can get somebody in who has like all of this fervor, and they will be bought because he was affiliated with a variety of like local magnates. He was affiliated with a variety of local banksters and mega corporations, and that's where the money will come from, and money always wins in America. And libertarians don't have that much money, which is why libertarians are constantly cucking to the Kochs or a variety of other people with big money from oil, from deals, from governments, and shit like that. And that's why these, like, even if a libertarian, quote unquote, did somehow rise to the top, it would be because they weren't a libertarian. And so they would either be compromised then, or the votes would somehow disappear, or the government would start a world war and institute a state of emergency to prevent an election. They don't want to lose their empire, and the idea that they would just roll over because enough people voted yellow, to me, seems like the actual thing that's out of touch with reality, especially with the absolute cavalcade of examples of this happening. Go ahead, Rose.
Yes. I was going to say, yeah, a libertarian candidate, if by some miracle they end up in office, they would just end up riding a motorcade through Dallas within weeks of office. This would never be allowed to happen.
The grassy knoll would just be a weed farm.
The only place where this argument does work, though, Jeremiah, is it Jeremy or Jeremiah?
I don't give a fuck, as long as it's not Jerry.
But okay, well, no, I'm just kidding. The only place where this works is in states like Georgia, where actually voting for the Libertarian is the only protest that works in that state for the way that their system is rigged. So write-in votes do not count. Like, they don't even show up in the total. That's the reason why, if you notice, the total vote count for president and senate and stuff like that don't line up. You would think that everybody, if it's electronic voting, you had to pick somebody. You'd think that it would be on there, right? Well, the reason why is in Georgia, if you pick a write-in candidate, that write-in candidate, in order to actually get a vote, has to be a qualified write-in.
Yeah.
So if you're not pre-qualified, so like Evan McMullen, the Utah candidate for back in 2016, he was actually one of the only qualified write-ins in Georgia. So like, if you had wrote Bugs Bunny, your vote literally does not count as a protest. It doesn't count as anything. It gets thrown out. Versus if you do vote for the Libertarian, which at this point is the only person allowed on the ballot as a third party in Georgia. If there was the ability to have, a fourth, fifth, whatever, vote for whoever you want to. But in those states, you do, like, voting for the third party is the only valid protest vote, because it's the only way that it can show up in the total as, I don't want either of these two. But it's only in rare situations like that. Not every state's going to be the same.
Yeah, fun fact, the last actual presidential election that I did anything with, I wrote in Sonic the Hedgehog.
Why are we talking about voting if we think it's a lost cause?
Because this is...
I think it is.
So here's the thing. This panel... This
Yeah.
panel in general, what I want from these panels is a variety of libertarian voices. That's what I want. I want libertarians of a variety of types to be able to talk to each other and be generally civil. So, like, that's the reason that I started these things. Like, Rose is Mises Caucus. You, Chris, support Malay. Hody used to be Mises Caucus. Now he's very emphasizing of Christian anarchy. Empathetic was a word that I was about to say, but that means like emphysema. John Cobb, he's on the Lars campaign, like not on the actual campaign, but he's a supporter of Lars. Dennis, is we are libertarians. Like, and Archie is a friend of both Dennis and Hody, and like works, if I understand correctly, with like the Fakertarians crowd. Scott Forbes is a left anarchist, and like all of these people and more, I've invited more as well. Like, you know, I want like there to be this clash, this friction, this discussion, because if I'm my internet fucks up sometimes, because if I'm wrong, like I want to know, you know, but if I'm right, I want everyone to know. And if I'm wrong, I want everyone to know. I want these things to be actually tested is the reason. And like I don't have to agree with all my guests. The point of this isn't for, if I wanted to jack off for an audience, I'd go on OnlyFans. The point of this is that my ideas are being tested, and so is everybody's.
Yeah. You know, Hody, I think I like the concept of Christian anarchism, but why did all these Christians roll over and play dead 4 years ago? If the churches had stood up against this COVID nonsense, I think that would have been very powerful and effective. More powerful than anything.
Yeah, we want to talk about
anything that could have happened. And as always, the churches bowed down to the tyrants, which is what they always do. Which is one reason why I'm not religious.
Sure, versus the atheists who have never had any issues with government or genocides or
I never said that atheists had a good record, Hody.
Of course,
but don't tell me you believe in God and then bullshit like this. Atheism does not prescribe any political philosophy. I'm sorry.
Killed in the name of atheism. It's been, I mean, there have, you know, like, for example, all the fear about those godless commies, like, okay, they were not being killed in the name of atheism.
Oh my gosh, very specifically.
State religion, such as, you know, Stalinism.
I have to.
No, like, even before, like, Stalin, like, literally people killed in the name of atheism. This is, like, what's that movie that show that's going around, the Red... Yeah. It's the Red Wave thing or whatever. This is even before the Red Wave shows up. They kill these people because
I was rude. I should have let you talk. Well, certainly Harrison Klebold. When they asked the girl, you know, do you believe in God, and they shot her. You know, I mean, 25 years ago, yesterday was Columbine. But anyway.
Yeah.
Well, let me just be very specific.
But I don't. Yeah.
Hody is not ever going to commit a genocide, and Hody's people are very much against the lockdowns. And like, there's a different group of Christians that you probably haven't been talking much to. I would advise, like, actually interacting with the Christian anarchist crowd if you're looking for the real radicals in that group, because there are so many actually fake Christians. Like, we talked on multiple occasions, Hody and I, about Christian anarchy specifically, both here and on other shows. You're free to watch the Christian anarchy, like, stream that we did. I think it was, like, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, where we really hammered down certain issues like this. Like, for instance, the churches that did not fucking offer like shelter during Katrina, like Austin not giving like fucking Lakewood to victims of Katrina, like
Harvey.
Oh, was it Harvey or was it Katrina?
It was Harvey in Houston.
Okay, well,
it was Harvey in Houston. Time.
Like, there are plenty of issues.
No, you're right. I was just helping you so that somebody else doesn't go, oh, you're wrong because you're...
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
glad.
just referring to the fact that I think the churches could have made a substantial difference if they'd stood up against this stuff. And
they should have.
Just like they bowed down to Hitler in Nazi Germany, they bowed down to Mussolini, they bowed down to Franco. They did what they always do.
So
they bow down every time.
Well,
when we generalize,
Hody, I'm going to defend you real quick. So give me a second. I've traveled full time. That's my thing. We live in an RV and I go across the country. That's the reason why it's hard for me to run for office, because it's kind of hard when you don't have. I have residency in one place, but I don't live in one place. I move around a lot. So unless I'm going to run for president, I mean, there's no office that really fits. Somebody who does win presidency wants to put me in a appointed office. Sure, we'll have fun. But to Hody's point, I don't want to attribute a certain denomination of Christianity to you without it being true. But I traveled through Utah during the during the lockdowns everywhere else, where you literally, whenever you stopped for fuel, could not get food. You couldn't like even talk to someone else at the other dispenser. Like you were not allowed to talk to anyone. It was a thing. Whenever we showed up in Utah, it was like nothing was happening. Everybody was the sweetest people in the world. They were the most welcoming people in the world. Whenever we pulled up to a KOA, I think it was St. George maybe, and the people in this KOA, like I pull up and I'm expecting them to have to check in on phone, over the phone and go through everybody's like restrictions on what they allow and what they don't. And instead, no, they're open and they say, hey guys, come on in. Hey, did you guys need some firewood? Here, let me help you. So whether or not their specific centralized control of the church fought against the lockdowns or whatever, I will say that the members, it seemed like, very much went with their convictions and treated everybody like human beings. And I credit them a lot for it.
And also,
so the individuals who were members of that church definitely fought back, and in the nicest way possible. It is literally civil disobedience by being nice to one another, and I loved it.
And also, just to be super clear, if you want to bring up the bowing to Nazis, it's probably because they were gonna get killed by the Nazis who criminalized all religion, including Christianity.
How did the Nazis take over?
If you Google Christian groups that went to jail for meeting during COVID, there's a great story there. And it's not just one story. The thing about it is there's hundreds. You go of people that were willing to go to jail for meeting during COVID. Now, the thing is you don't hear about them because, of course, the government wants you to stop meeting during COVID, right? Like they're flexing their authoritarian nuts and they want you to lose. They want focus off of this. They don't want you to be like, oh my gosh, they're sending people to prison. All right. One of the cases that got a lot of attention was because it was New York, and you'll remember they let the Muslims meet, but the Jewish ones, they actually remember that they were even distancing and masked and everything, and they still arrested them. Mm-hmm. The rabbis meeting up, and the governor was like, well, we saw the one is a celebration and the other is a normal meeting, some BS excuse or whatever for why that they were uneven about it. And the thing is there is, when we generalize people, like I did with the atheists just a minute ago, if I treat you all as eugenicists or all as Red Scare Stalinists or whatever, that's when we get kind of screwed up and we get fractured as opposed to unified, because there are many Christian denominations that didn't support the lockdowns. I know I was against it and I was a Christian. There were many who went to jail. Now, if you say that is your reason, and you said this for not affiliating with a faith, then that's on you, but maybe just change the group that you're a part of, because ultimately every group in history is not perfect, and the state has used those imperfections to do terrible, terrible things. Now, I don't want to deny the evils of Christianity. I've talked about them on the show. Imperialism, racism, they got in on the eugenics as well. Like Manifest Destiny, terrible, awful things that have been guised in the name of Christ. I mean, like that whole nationalism, even though Christ says specifically don't do this, and a whole bunch of Christians decide to go nationalists anyway, to the point where it even might become the majority. But the majority doesn't define the entire group. God is not the majority of Christians. God is God. There are plenty of times in the scriptures that a Christian man gets struck dead for lying, and a complete, I don't know what God is, I don't know, I'm just doing my best here. God says, oh yeah, you're going to be all right. I'm going to go save you. You'll be all right. You'll be in paradise. So the thing is even within the gospel itself of Christianity, it says that the majority of Christians don't get to speak for Christians. Yeah. So the idea that most people laid down and rolled over, well, I imagine that's probably true among atheists as well. All people. When we have a gun to our heads, who knows how we'll behave? When somebody gets raped, do you blame the victim or do you blame the rapist? A lot of people didn't show up, and yes, you're right. They should have been willing to die to resist government tyranny. Most of us should. How many people do, though? And is it their fault when their knees buckle and they say, maybe I don't want to die over this? Maybe The idea is, hey, we'll conduct an online church because I also want my sensitive grandpa who could die if he catches COVID to be able to attend the same thing. So let's just all do it. There could be a voluntary reason for doing it too, as opposed to a state reason. I mean, there's just a lot of these things to consider, that the idea that you would blame Christians and say that that's the reason why you don't feel like affiliating with faith anymore, I just don't know that that's the best idea, because you can make that argument for about any philosophy. As soon as a majority has a bad behavior, there's a cultural problem, that you just say like, oh, that's why that whole group is trash.
That was a good speech. Now, jumping in here.
Yeah, like two things. First off, because we got about 20 more minutes. I don't think any of us want to be here for more than 3 hours. So we got about 20 more minutes. You got to come in sooner next time. We'll be talking about direct action and a bunch of other stuff. We'll be going over voting versus non-voting and that sort of thing. We'll also be talking about like more of these libertarian principles next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. But I'll give you like a full 5-minute block of time to give your speech and response.
Okay.
I don't. If a majority doesn't define a group, what does define a group? I mean,
I don't define
after
groups.
watching what's happened the last, after what's my general impression is that if you waved a magic wand tomorrow and made the entire world a libertarian society, at least half of the world would be living under a dictatorship in 100 years. I think they would all throw it into the garbage. And everybody always likes to bring up these existence of resistors. I was in Munich 5 years ago, and I visited the place where Sophie Scholl got arrested. I am well aware of Sophie Scholl. I think she's a hero. I think she was a great German. I also think she was a minority living in a country of a bunch of stupid animals. And that's exactly what they were. Stupid animals. And they elevated that and created that themselves. So, I mean, how does this stuff happen? How does this stuff grow out of allegedly civilized creatures? It's Sophie Scholl was 1 in 1,000 when it came of Germans.
Well, one thing
she was a minority.
Yeah. Well,
a very small minority. Is she a hero? Yes. Is she a great person? Yes. The other people in the White Rose, they're all great. I'm glad I visited that place, but I'm not going to act like they represented the majority of Germans because they were insignificant. Almost immediately, some guy says, there's a janitor says, "Stop! You're under arrest." Because he was a stupid animal who wanted to support Hitler. You're under arrest. And after COVID, what else am I supposed to think? These people would have killed me because I haven't been vaccinated.
What the fuck?
I can't help but note that you're dehumanizing Germans. And that was exactly their problem, is that they were dehumanizing Jews.
Most Homo sapiens dehumanize themselves.
Okay.
It's unfortunate, but it's true. Most people are the types who would rat out their neighbors if they were told it was necessary for public safety or some bullshit. I mean, we saw this during COVID. It's why, you'll hear the argument from some of the more blue-pilled libertarians about how, everyone's a libertarian. They just don't know it yet. No, I'm sorry. I wish.
No, they're not.
I mean, most of that were true. Okay?
Most of them are Klingons. They just don't know it yet. And the Vulcans need to separate from the Klingons. There's no point. It's a lost cause. I mean, when you spend,
Worf is one of my favorite characters, and I'll die on that hill.
I mean, if you spend 20 years trying to get somebody clean and sober, and they don't get clean and sober, eventually you just give up and hope that they die.
This is collectivist talk.
Distance themselves.
What is your solution to the problem?
Wait.
Okay. I mean, Millet is the one thing in this world I think that gives us reason to have hope.
No, actually, it's not Millet.
How do you educate people that are seemingly impossible to educate?
Yeah,
That
I
is the
think
question.
you just made the argument, though, for the central government, because whenever you separate, now you've got to worry about the threat of the Klingons, who's going to protect you. It turns yet again into the same cycle of we're going to separate from the other, and then we have to protect ourselves from the other. And then eventually an other crops up like a cancer to you in your own self. And if you can't crush them down fast enough, then they just break off like mitosis and become another group that you've got to protect yourself against. So it seems like human nature to be cyclical eventually we outgrow the ability to work together in one society, and that bubble eventually breaks off, and that bubble will either exist in its own little bubble until someone else comes and knocks it out, like what Hody was talking about earlier, where most of the time these people, it's the outsiders that come in and wipe them out because they are actually doing well. The question becomes then, well, then how do we make that little bubble that goes off and does its own little thing protected without becoming the thing that we're trying to outrun?
Okay, I'm gonna answer that. 'Cause, I do apologize. Came in late. Just was tired doing a bunch of yards. Here's my answer to everything here. So, with what's going on, especially like we're talking about Christianity, the GOP. I'll just refer this back to what's going on now. Is obviously everybody saw what's going on with Senator Mike Johnson. Even my libertarian friends are starting to get the point. Okay, we want to distance ourselves from the GOP. So what do you do then? The GOP and the DNC control everything. Well, we start winning local races. So I think voting does work locally and maybe statewide. As far as like if one group resists another group or one group takes another group out, my faith isn't in Malay. My faith isn't in a president at all, because that's still a centralized position. In my opinion, the more and more I look at the thinker Murray Bookchin, and the more I understand how his confederal committees work, I understand that power is an inevitability of human existence. Someone's going to have. It's interesting. Libertarians will say we can't get rid of guns because somebody will have the guns. I agree. We can't get rid of power. Someone will have the power. I'm not saying I'm not necessarily an anarchist. What I am saying is this: if you go out voluntary basis and you start to win local elections, which the Mises Caucus can do, they're seats that are not contested, then you actually can create local committees. Those local committees can work together. If in fact somebody turns rogue, then okay, we don't confederate with that local committee, and then they get ostracized. If in fact that does work, and then local machines are able to work with each other, local organizations are able to work each other, you create a dual power structure to centralize power. That and if there is some people who are still authoritarians, which there will be, I'm sure there will be authoritarians. It's not that there won't be any, they'll just have less power. And in regards to Christianity or Islam or anything, I think you can find bad stuff in every faith. Clearly, I do not consider the Speaker of the House a Christian. I consider him a fascist. So, and he's proved that multiple times. So that's my thoughts on everything real quick. You're not going to get rid of human error. You're not even going to make it better. The only thing that would be different in COVID is it's like, okay, well, this municipality, like my municipality, to be fair, they didn't really care. I'm kind of out in like a Reagan Republican area. They're like, yep, masks, boop, boop, boop. And they didn't care. So you can in fact get conscientious objectors to something on a local level, and that's what really matters. Then that local level works with other local levels.
So two things before anything else. The first thing is that, like, if we're gonna say work for those local things and then disaffiliate like rogue entities, there needs to be a certain understanding of what rogue means, and there needs to be a certain understanding of how to do that. Because, like, first off, John, wait, are you saying that there's like, okay, well, I hope he's okay. He smelled smoke outside. Okay, so let me just say these two things. We have to understand what it means to disaffiliate, and we also have to understand what it means to have a rogue element. Because, for instance, if we're using the Libertarian Party as an analog, disaffiliation was what was attempted with in terms of like taking over from a rogue element, was what was attempted in Michigan, and the Libertarian Party is still suing them. And that's what you get when you get a fundamentally corrupt organization to be in charge of certain elements of your sort of rebellion. And the other half of it is that when you have a corrupt element who is like responsible for a giant state. Like Detroit is huge, so are multiple other places in Michigan, but still pales in comparison to Cali. And Adrian Malagon is a toxic, cancerous cunt. So what I'm trying to say is that when you end up with these people, and you end up trying to start talking about affiliation, disaffiliation, etc. What I'm trying to say is, like, it's a tall order, and the reason I'm saying all this is because that's going to be some of the stuff we're going to bring up next week on Real Libertarians, something or other, blah blah, when we go over like the actual like nuts and bolts here, because there's a bunch that we didn't discuss today, and like 3 hours is coming up, and I want to give everybody here like 2 minutes to give a closing statement, basically, that'll sum up what they think. And the other thing is, I want to start with Dennis, then we'll go to Christopher, then we'll go to Scott, Archie, John, Hody, Rose, and me.
Really, what I wanted to get into is something that was just said here about winning at the local level and doing that sort of thing. We had that happen actually in Indiana, where Mark Rutherford got onto a board. It was a legal board, basically just set all the legal rules for the bar and everything inside of the state. And the rule was that you had to have an even number of Republicans, Democrats, or something. It was an odd number of people, and they needed one more person. They didn't want to have a Republican or a Democrat in charge of, so they elected the Libertarian. He got on that board. He's been on that board for decades, chair of the board now, and he is effectively making changes, doing that sort of thing. So that's an example of that happening. He is also considered a prag, is ostracized by the Mises Caucus, is running for chair this year, right? So, and it's also funny that people try to associate him with Sarwark when Nick Sarwark was the guy who prevented him from being chair back, when Nick ended up winning. It was a hilarious thing. We kind of have a thing internally about that, but Mark Rutherford is probably one of the nicest people you'd ever meet. He's one of my mentors. He's a wonderful human being. And that's, I think, a good example of where the Liberty Party has always tried to win at the local level, to do those sorts of things in order to affect change in our local environments. And if we can do that, if we can affect change locally, then when these elections that are like for the president take place, if you're running your state, you have that say on ultimately how those votes get counted and resulted, right? So having people on the local level doing that is where you're going to help affect the federal level eventually in that area. So that's kind of all I want to say about that. That I think voting does something, especially at the local level. Get out there and do it, and affect change, understanding that you may not win, but at least you're getting your voice out there and you're making people know. And if you have an election where you can beat the spread, that next election people are going to start paying attention to what you're saying, because they know that you could be the eventual decider on who wins that election by doing that.
More a comment on just how I feel, what I'm thinking right now. I'm really losing confidence in the ability of any type of nonprofit organization to be effective at changing things. Even because it seems like they don't have the correct incentives in place. And when you have a political party, those incentives are even worse. One thing I have seen, though, is I've seen some organizations kind of look like they're flirting with the dark side, and then they come back. One libertarian organization in the 90s, I was very worried about their direction, and they've went back into a positive direction right now. I don't know and it seems like when there's elections involved, it's even less so, because nobody can really do anything effective for a long time because they know they're going to be reelected in 2 years. It's unfortunate, but one thing I didn't get to ask too is I'd be curious to know what people think about what Roger Ver has been saying about Bitcoin lately. I have to say I still think there's some potential for good there, but I'm losing a lot of confidence in that too. Although there are other cryptos out there too.
Well,
I agree you can't put faith in kings, but I also realize that, true leaders can be educators, and sometimes there are leaders who will inspire the public to want to be educated. When that Brazilian MMA fighter said all that stuff about Mises, I thought, you think he's saying this stuff because of Milei? I mean, I don't know. Rand often said a philosophical re-education has to take place before there can be any change. It looks like to me Milei may be doing that. I really don't know. I definitely think a philosophical re-education has to take place, and maybe there's no way to make it happen, but it's certainly not happening anyway. And it's also interesting to say too, because the Nathaniel Branden Institute back in the 60s was a for-profit organization, and I think it was probably more effective than any other libertarian organization since then. I don't know what to think right now of the American Liberty Movement. It seems like to me it's in a complete shambles right now. And I didn't say party, I said the whole movement, because I think the Libertarian Party just is a place where all these people who follow various think tanks meet in the middle, and that's why it's gotten so crazy. The COVID nonsense and all this other stuff, though, I just can't believe that humanity, or whatever you want to say, has sunk to such a low point that it has right now. And you kind of ask yourself, and one thing I've learned, unfortunately, it doesn't matter how bad things seem, they can always get worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
so we'll go. So two things. We'll have a crypto roundtable at some point. And we'll go over crypto as a concept, crypto, the best crypto projects, like Bitcoin as a concept, alternatives to Bitcoin, all that stuff at some point, because that's a very interesting topic. And then the other stuff we'll definitely hit next week, and there will probably be more panelists because certain people who were interested couldn't make it. So we'll try to hit all of these subjects and more, and there's plenty in the chat that I couldn't even remotely hit. So next up, Archie.
So we're talking about changing things through voting or not. And so as I see it, we can accept the status quo. We have three options. We can accept the status quo, we can vote to change things, or we can choose violence to change things. I don't see a third option. I will not accept the status quo because it is fundamentally unjust. It's absurd how unjust. Like the tsunami of shit stories that we're faced with, that, for instance, if we could get rid of qualified immunity, so many of those stories would go away. Like, it's just boom after boom after boom after boom, and you forget all the names because it's literally too many to remember. The first person I remember being completely just flat out executed by police was Amadou Diallo. 41 rounds. 41 rounds. And that was like 2 decades ago. How many since then, right? So I will not accept the status quo.
Good.
But I'm also not, I am a libertarian because I reject violence. So I have run for office and I'm going to keep running for office. And the reason I ultimately want to run for office and encourage others to do the same is because the United States military, under our system, falls under civilian control. The United States Congress can do the necessary reforms and recall the military to within our borders and defund it to a sane, actually defensive level. So that's why I vote. That's why I encourage other people to vote. And that's why I run for office and encourage other people to run for office.
Very cool. Scott, 2 minutes.
Sure. First of all, what a lovely group of thoughtful people. It's such a delight to be here with you guys. Second of all, I agree with the 3 possible options: status quo, participating in the system's existing avenues for change, or violence. And I think it's essential for any realistic person to recognize that violence is already the actual currency that we're dealing in. You know, you listed some victims of it, or cited some victims of it, and named one. And, you know, I'm coming from probably way outside the consensus here, but I think that the only possible rational reaction is to prepare for and engage in violence back. I think that there have been some important nonviolent alternatives or underpinnings for that kind of response mentioned here, mutual aid in particular, creating systems to supply the community with what it needs without reliance on the government are essential. But at the end of the day, here's where I fall way outside the likely consensus here. The system exists to protect capital, and capital is not going to let you undermine that system with that system. They're simply not going to. I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, I bet most of you are, to look back to the Enclosure Acts. I mean, we are involved in a 400 to 500 year war against capital, and we are on the losing side because we keep playing it by their rules. So vote or don't vote, you know, local elections matter. It does matter, like, who's making sure your water is clean. That's a pretty big deal on a day-to-day level, but imagining that that's going to solve the systemic issues that are causing this centralization is a bit of a delusion, in my opinion. And I will look forward to hearing from everybody else.
All right, so two things. The first thing is, I basically use euphemisms to describe exactly what you just said on a regular basis. You'll be able to hear those euphemisms on a regular basis on this channel. So you and I could probably agree much more about this off air, ideally on an encrypted channel. So there's some stuff that you and I would probably, and like after this stream, I'm going to eat a bunch of protein and go work out, because I think practical physical fitness and being able to fist them with love, hand them a bouquet of flowers, is very necessary. Ultimately, like that like we would probably, and I'm the resident fucking like filthy commie over here, being like friendly with the left on a routine basis, and like, you know, constantly pushing back against what I perceive to be an overbearing culture of fascism. So if you come on these streams like more often, you'll probably find yourself agreeing quite a bit with me, who oftentimes is the odd person out in terms of like being very radical in certain respects, because like I want these things to be diverse. That's my goal. I want a lot of different people to be able to speak their piece. And with that in mind, like the next person to do their sign off should be John here, because John like is new to the stream, and hope this was a like productive experience for you.
I loved hanging out with you guys. Like, it's nice to have a civil conversation with people that you don't agree with all the time. And unfortunately, in the world we live in now, it's hard to come by. You either exist in an echo chamber, or you are a very lonely individual. So it's very nice to have this for a Sunday night. But I just wanted to go next mainly because of what you said. I call myself a radical centrist. And the reason I call myself a radical centrist is because most of my prescriptions are well down the middle, but they're radical to everybody. The idea that we could live together is radical to so many people. The idea that we could compromise is radical to so many people. So I do agree that it's time that we be prepared. I think that there is still time and there is still a way. The founding fathers never gave up on trying to fix things. They just realized that it became unfixable. And I think that we should continue to vote and do everything we can to show our disagreement until that time. But I do agree that national elections and individual elections a lot of times are rigged and don't matter because they are run by other flawed human beings. And that's the part that people fail to mention, is that whenever a set of flawed human beings can influence something to their liking, they will. That's the reason why I agree in a set of restrictions to where we all agree, hey, we're not going to do those things to one another. I don't know what those agreements are, but voting in local elections does matter. Where it starts to not matter is in positions where one place can influence for a lot of other places. So I totally agree. I think that voting for your presidential candidate or whatever. Vote how you feel. I personally am backing Lars right now, not because I agree with everything he does, but because out of the field of candidates, he's the one that I resonate with the most. And if you resonate most with Josh, I don't like the guy, but you know what? I like you for resonating with him. I think that you should stand behind the people that you most feel a community with. And if we ever want to have this voluntary system where we can all come together, it starts with conversations like these, where all of us from different communities can voluntarily show up together on a Sunday night and have a conversation without yelling or screaming at one another. So I just really appreciate you guys for doing that. It means a lot, really. Being on the road's lonely. So,
so 3 more. Let's start with Kareem. You got 2 minutes.
All right. I will make it quicker than that, actually. I'm Kareem from the Mises Caucus, Mad Liberty, and also Jeremiah Server EXC. Really good conversation today. I enjoyed it a lot, and looking forward to this even making the panel bigger. It shows that we're going to talk about can decentralized order work or not. If we can get 9 people on a panel to socially cooperate, I think that's a pretty good indication that decentralized social cooperation in work. And I do think if, like I was talking about, these committees that get together, this is exactly how it would work. Like pop on the, I don't think it'd be a formal state thing. It'd be like pop on the Discord, like, hey, so-and-so, can you take care of those ideas? I consider myself a left market libertarian, so I've been looking at their website. I'm not part of them yet, but go check out C4SS, a state for a centerless society. They're not libsoc, they're left wing, they're left market libertarians. So I'll give you a kind of different perspective in the fact that you can, in fact, be anti-capitalist and pro-free market. And go check that out. Also, I really go and check out my Facebook. I got Jack Lloyd's comic book, so that's pretty cool. That's all I got. I'm on Twitter, Kareem6633, and on all those things I mentioned.
Hody.
So I'm going to offer up that rail. When we kind of like, do we do violence? Do we do nothing and just deal with it? Do we vote? Which is kind of also violence. What do we do here? This would probably be an entire separate episode, but peaceful protest and the area of peace is an absolutely acceptable, philosophically sound means of revolution. When Christians, when they say, hey, if your enemy, slugs you, offer the other cheek. When they take your shirt off from your coat, try it. This is something that if you want to see somebody stop being your enemy or being unwilling to be your enemy very quickly, is extremely effective. This is something that in India they deployed. It's their colonizers. They were completely unable to violence their way out of the situation. And they could have done, there's a difference between peace and nonviolence. They could have done nonviolence, which is standing in a place they're not supposed to stand in and getting violence done against them or something like that. Nonviolence is an acceptable form of protest. I'm not going to trash it. But peaceful protest is a little bit different. Peaceful protest is saying, this person is lording over me. I'm going to make them some tea. I'm going to make them some lunch. I'm going to give them a free donut when I'm making donuts. And then all of a sudden, when the order to fire comes in, when they do nonviolence and say, I'm not giving you this money that you say you want from me, they found that their oppressors were unwilling to pull the trigger. And therefore, India achieved, through this method, achieved a great deal of freedom and eventually total independence from their colonizers. This is an effective thing that's been, I can talk about it personally in my life. I worked with the police here in Ogden. There was these stories were published back when the Libertarian Party had a newsletter, and I was with the. I worked with the police to feed those who were imprisoned. I met police. I befriended them. I got in touch with them. I talked with them. of course, I let them know what I thought they were doing was wrong. And then Ogden gave the order to anyone who was providing supplies to the homeless. And we had a big I want to say homeless problem. We had many homeless people. I don't consider the homeless a problem, but obviously for them in the eyes of the law, it's a problem. And of course, it's a problem that they're homeless. I want them to have homes. I want them to be around. And I violated that order along with many others. This was published in my local newspapers. And the police refused to arrest us, and we were able to take care of the homeless here. They disobeyed their orders. I'm not saying it's 100%. Christ still got nailed to the cross. The cross. The apostles were still martyred for their beliefs. Peaceful protest is the willingness to accept that some terrible things are going to happen to you, and the ability to say, yeah, that's fine. You can defeat my body. You can't defeat my spirit. And you look at what the willingness for those apostles to be martyred for their beliefs did for the movement going forward. Their willingness to lay down their lives made it so that future generations wouldn't have to lay down theirs, because they said, wow, these people really believed in what they were doing. And we might be the liberty movement that says, you know what, I'm going to feed the people if it's against the law. I'm going to house someone even if it's against the law. And I'm going to be kind to the people who aggress against me. It may not be fair. It may not be right. It may not appeal to your sense of justice. But I think that this is the way we achieve success in the liberty movement. Of course, we're so angry and justifiably angry. Voting is like being in the Saw system, right? Like if you do this, or let's say Joker from Batman, right? Like you press this button, these people die, or this button, these people die. And some people are like, I'm not going to press any buttons. And say, all right, if I have to press a button, I'm going to press the button that kills the least people. Or you say, hey, is there an option to vote for somebody who wants to kill nobody? Fine. Voting will take care of itself. But practice peace, practice nonviolence, practice being good to your enemies. And I'm just telling you to see what happens. Voting will take care of itself if you're doing what you need to do. Voting is like taking a temperature of somebody we already know is sick, right? But if you're doing what you can to make the victim healthy, then voting will take care of itself. I wouldn't even worry about it all that much. I do appreciate that we can like have a dialogue on the subject and disagree or agree or whatever. But to me, that's less important than that we're being kind to our neighbors, that we're being kind even to our enemies. And if we do this with intent, not just, I'm kind to a cop if he shows up. Let them know your names. Go out of your way to be kind to the people who oppress you. And when they take something, give them even more than they ask for. And see how willing they are to pull that trigger when the gun is aimed at your head. I think that you'll find it takes guts, and it's a scary thing. I have a great life. I have kids. I have a job. I'm very scared to be arrested. I don't want that to happen to me. But if you can that fear, I think you'll find that peace as a weapon is better than any sword that you could wield. Christ healing the ear of the people who came to arrest him did much more than Peter was ever going to do with the sword that was used to cut off the ear of the person who tried to arrest him. I hope it's something that you'll appreciate too, something to consider. I haven't always been a pacifist. It took me a while to grapple with it. I think it's something that you'll enjoy as well.
Rose.
Right. So, wow, this conversation went into some interesting directions. To go back to what we were saying about, voting versus, refusing to vote. Like, I mean, okay, I would like to say I too completely reject the system. I think if the electoral system is going to pass, it's not going to be because voting actually does anything. It's going to be because we can use the electoral system as a means to help with, networking and community building, such as, in the case of a political third party, its purpose should be, not to actually run candidates with the expectation that they're going to get elected, but, for messaging and education and to attract more like-minded individuals into one location so that, we can build networks and get people organized. I think, voting, the only exception to my, rule about voting is that, at the very local level, I do think, voting for local candidates who run with the purpose of, nullification. I think that's a useful strategy. But otherwise, no, I think the I think solutions are going to be outside the electoral system. I think we need to, build community. We need to practice, mutual aid. We need to practice nullification, and we need to be practicing counter economics. With the ultimate goal of decentralization and starving the system of its power.
Yeah. All right, so now we are to the plugging round, because I've said a lot of words. People know my opinions here. And generally, I think next week we'll nail down some topics. We'll talk about we'll put some nails in the voting thing. We'll also talk about violence versus nonviolence. We'll keep it strictly historical, and we'll keep it strictly philosophical, because we can't encourage violence on YouTube. But what I will say is the conversation should be interesting. So we'll have that, and we'll also have a variety of other things. And we can also talk about various delvings into spiritualism. And that should be a good conversation for the next Real Libertarians Principles Roundtable thing, because I think that there's a certain thing that should happen there. But I am going to just say, for my part, if you like what you saw here today, promote it. Share this with people. Tag the fuck out of people in the replies to shit. Do what Hody did and make Twitter and Facebook posts about the shit that you got to participate in today and how it's different from other fucking conversations, because the only way that this is ever going to do anything successful is if we actually get the word out that we're willing to have these conversations, because nobody's going to give a shit if nobody talks about it. The only people who are talking about it are people who want to talk shit behind backs, with a vast majority. So get the word out there. That's the most important thing. And speaking of getting the word out there, also, if you want to help me get the word out there, there's plenty of donate links in the sub box. Or in the description box. And I think Rose, if you go to her Facebook profile, has a GoFundMe to send her to national. And there's plenty of other stuff that will be coming up. But the last thing I'm going to say is each of you got 25 seconds to plug whatever you didn't. I guess we'll start with John.
Okay. If anybody wants to read my random ramblings on the internet, I'm on X and pretty much nothing else. And then all of my other projects don't have my name on purpose. So you guys have a good time, and I appreciate y'all.
All right. Archie.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Rose.
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook. I use the name, or I go by the name Rose Lee, Lee, on my for my, pretty much all my political interactions. Feel free to send me a friend request. I'm not really on other platforms generally.
Dennis. You are, yeah.
I am sorry. I am Ryan Reinhold on everything. So Reinhold on Facebook, Reinhold on Twitter, Instagram, I think, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also on We Are Libertarians Low-Key Wall, and you can get me on reinhold.org as well.
Cool. Christopher. Baker Street is a great song with saxophone. Okay, I think maybe he walked away from his machine. Saxophone, by the way, is still the ultimate instrument. Anybody who doesn't like saxophone is genetically defective.
I've been playing sax since I was 4th grade.
Good. Hey, so you get it.
40 years.
It's the perfect instrument.
45 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I play a lot of different instruments, but yeah, the saxophone was the first one I picked up and learned. So.
Yeah, you should throw us some sax on the next stream. Make some Liberty sax. You can play us in for the sound check. Hody.
Yeah, he can do our intro.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I should put one. I've got guitars on the wall. I should get a sax put back here too. I got a tenor sitting in the
Yeah,
Always.
tenor sax. See, and you even get the tenor part. Awesome. Cool. Hody, plug.
The Love First Christians. We're just a group of Christians that welcome a lot of the questions, a lot of challenging of mainstream, especially the evangelical narrative, but we're welcoming of all kinds. If you're even curious, we welcome non-Christians into a general chat. We actually have a really, we not just welcome it, we look forward to it. We have a really specific way we like to talk to non-believers that is very different than like putting them down, making them feel bad, which you might get with other like missionary type programs. Now, even if you don't want to be missionaryized and you just like, hey, I'm just here because I just want a Christian perspective, we welcome that as well. Yeah, so just let me know. I'm Hody Johns. You can find me anywhere on social media. It's the Love First Christians, and we'd love to have you and talk to you.
Scott.
Oh, I got nothing to plug. I'm not selling anything. Go help somebody, give people free stuff. Take some if you don't have any to give away already. And if you really need to find me, Rose knows where I am.
Kareem.
Anarch Unity. Go check it out. And C4SS.
All right. Yeah, I got all my links in the description. If y'all want to throw me some bucks, if y'all want to keep me with a roof over my head, you're free to do that. There's plenty of stuff coming here and elsewhere. I'm gonna do the engagement stream tomorrow because this already went for 3 hours and 20 minutes, and I think like people probably would rather see me tomorrow. So I'll be doing the audience engagement stream, which is just an informal stream where I talk about comments. You can, if you want, like, to address some shit that I said in a video, like one of my fucking, like, vlogs that I do, one of my uploaded, like, Twitter spaces, one of my anything that I do on my own, feel free to leave a comment because I will address your comments live on the vlog streams. So feel free. That... I'm everywhere. I'm omnipresent. You cannot get rid of the hedgehog infestation. You can find my bullshit in the fuck. And, yeah. Be well, all. Smash the fucking state.
Hey, Dennis, can you tell me what happened with Mark Rutherford? I want to know what happened there. And Nick's artwork, if he's still there.